No, next to,
The wheels came off of it last night.
that is not,
Wouldn't it
we
be
nice,
nice
that
if
is not the way it works. No,
Oh, that's it.
Just,
What that is.
just one, we've been asked, we've been asked to attend.
What happened? What did you do? Break the chair?
I might have
I
broken
don't
the
think
chair.
it's a
started
good
to
idea
think-
for us to show.
I think Leroy just moved it. That's Leroy's chair. That's
If we show up with 9 different,
I think there's a spare.
There, we had spares. We got spares.
so I'm gonna propose.
Oh,
that
my
we
little
do
dude
this
got in the
Thursday.
wrong spot. Now I don't know where I am.
Well, no, I've seen
At
Leroy
the end of
like, just
Thursday,
go back on
Thursday.
next Thursday.
Oh, fall all the way back?
17?
So he likes to.
No.
He likes to. Yeah,
Sometimes he likes to cross his arms and kick back.
The ballast kind of takes him over.
Well, we have to decide where we're going on. We've been invited, I'll let you guys, we're invited for additional items too.
Will we touch on that at the end of the meeting?
Yes, absolutely.
What time are you looking at?
Talk about it, Dennis.
all the stuff that you've given us to put in the book.
I've got a
Here it
photo.
is, at the back of the book.
I know. I tried it. Didn't I? I didn't three-hole punch it?
For me to get,
There was a couple problems with hole punches, but I'm gonna go back and sort of look at it, because I think it might be a little bit out of order.
big red suit.
No, we'll
If it makes you feel any better, I've stuffed it in the back of my book too.
see together so we can go.
Santa has no.
Should have said
clue.
nothing. Oh my goodness. All right, okay.
There's no politics here. You're just in charge of
Good evening. I'm going to call the Auburn Planning Board meeting of October 8th, 2019 to order. I will begin with roll call, starting on my far left.
Brian Carrier.
John Engler.
Dan Carroll.
Evan Sear,
Matthew Duval.
Stephen Martelli.
Katie Boss.
Kyle Pepin.
Absent tonight is Sam Scoggin. Sam Scoggin is a regular member of the board. As rules dictate, we choose one of our associate members to be an acting full member of the board when a full member is absent tonight. That member will be John Engler. For the remainder of the meeting tonight, John Engler will have full voting authority as a regular member of the board. Kyle Pepin will continue as an associate member so that people in the public understand. As an associate member, he has full rights to discuss, debate, but is prohibited from taking part in votes, motions with respect to public hearing. The first item on our agenda are the minutes for August 13th and the September 10th, 2019 meetings. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second? A motion has been made with a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Minutes are approved. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing. Public hearings proceed as follows. The board will receive a report from the staff. During that staff report, the board may ask questions. When the staff report is concluded, the board will ask questions of staff. Once the board has completed asking questions of staff, we will ask the applicant or an agent for the applicant to come forward and provide any additional information they believe is pertinent. At that time, the planning board may ask that individual or those individuals questions. When the board is satisfied with the presentation by the applicant or the applicant's agent, we will open the public input section of the hearing. It is during that time that we will listen to members of the public regarding that hearing. When no more members from the public wish to speak, we will close the public input section of that hearing, move on to discussion, debate, and finally make motions. Our first public hearing is for a proposed zoning, a rezoning of 2.3 acres of land located generally at 965 Minot Avenue, parcel ID number 217-002, from suburban residential to general business, extending the existing frontage zoning to the rear of Petro's Ace Hardware. Is staff ready to present the report?
Yes, we are.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. John Petroselli of Petro's Ace Hardware is seeking a zoning map amendment to change a portion of the parcel abutting his property. This is the larger parcel behind Ace Hardware, which is right here. This lot in the corner here the current site. He purchased this property to the rear, and the zoning map amendment would effectively be to this parcel with a line that would look like this. So it would be a total of 2.3 acres, 2.35 acres. That would be the total of the zoning change to general business to commercial. The purpose for this change is that currently he has a one-way entrance into Minot from Minot Avenue, in and out. He serves this large yard area with various large construction and landscaping materials. Trucks loading and unloading are having a difficult time turning, getting in and out, and the purchase of this property with the intent to make this a turnaround would expedite and make the business much more efficient and much more planned design as this business has evolved. The purpose of the general business 2 zone is to have more planned commercial development. I'm going to switch now to the comprehensive plan so that you can see the intent. Just before I do that, I want to give you a little more context. Every area here in red is zoned general business 2. The land across the street is zoned industrial. You will recognize the American Concrete and several other businesses that front here. There is a small patch of urban residential here, several residences here in rental, and then there are several businesses here as well that are in the general business too, but are still, in one case, looking like a residential home. The area, again, in purple is suburban residential. And we're going to change this to the comprehensive plan so we get a sense of what the long-term vision for this area is. So as we look at this, the hatched area, again, is still considered to be long-term residential and low moderate density residential. And this area in pink is determined to be planned commercial development. The intent of this zoning classification is for new development, redevelopment, and substantial expansions should be subject to an enhanced set of development and design standards to assure that this area evolves as an attractive gateway. These standards should establish a landscape buffer strip along the street, limit the types of activities that can occur between the front of the building and the street, and screen all services and storage visibility from the street. So the intent here long-term is to evolve this general business, this GB2 zone, into more of a planned commercial development zone. So this gateway into Minot doesn't become another center street. So that was the intent at the time of the comprehensive plan. The GB2 zone has not fully evolved to those standards. However, the intent of the applicant is to follow the intent of this zone by allowing for more efficient and attractive use and expansion of the property. I'll further note that, oops, where am I? As you look to the property here in Google Earth, it is on the corner. It just so happens that his brother owns the board shop that's in expansion here. The combination of these two businesses on the corner with this addition could make for a much more efficient circulation, parking, and pedestrian design in the long term, which again meets the intent of the zone. The applicant before you is a simple request for the rezoning of that portion of land. There is no design before you, but the intent of the applicant is to use this for, let me get back to this. Oh, clicked the wrong button. I don't want that. This one. Is to use this for circulation. Currently, the way this is designed, this is about 100 feet here. He would put in a 20 to 30 foot drive, which would allow for continued tree coverage and landscaping through here, and allow for the rear entrance and circulation here. As you know, this is a pretty tricky pull out and pull in from Minot, and this would allow for turn movements at the intersection. There is one item I want to address before moving forward with questions and discussion. The applicant has proposed to, as you'll notice from your packet, zone this portion here. Let's see if I get my tools right. So, oops, thought I dropped down my tools. So there is a remainder here from the proposal that essentially creates a triangular piece that's left over. We would recommend that this, in addition to the rezoning of this as suburban residential, that we complete the rezoning concept by changing this from suburban residential as a triangular piece to the neighboring urban residential. So there isn't an outstanding lot here in suburban residential. So that would be staff's recommendation. The applicant has not requested that change at this time, but I believe it would benefit the overall land use plan for the area.
Is that triangle owned by the Mr. Petroselli?
Yes. The applicant owns this parcel at this junction.
The whole,
Yes, the applicant is here and he can address some of those questions, but he did purchase this. I believe the previous owner retained a division here. I'm not sure exactly where that is, but I think it's in this vicinity. So at this time, I will open it to questions.
Are there questions for the staff from the planning board?
What's the exact location on your red map there of Petros?
Yes. So this is the drive, the entrance drive, and this is the actual store here. So it's actually these two parcels. This is the board shop here, and this is the hardware store, and this is the yard for materials.
So quick question about the triangle. Would you want to turn that purple, I mean, not red, or would you want to turn it yellow?
Yellow.
Yellow, okay.
To match the neighboring residential, yes.
And my question is, just for clarification, and maybe it's from the applicant, to actually where the border line is to his property that he presently owns compared to what he wants to change. Sound like you weren't sure?
I'm sorry, I could probably show you. You want to know which? This line would go from here to here.
Correct.
And
then
here to here. So it's kind of a simple triangulation, line to line to here. Here to here.
is where he's looking to change.
Yes.
But he still owns that triangle you
Yes.
talk about turning to yellow.
He owns the triangle, he owns the area above, so essentially.
And
we would-
where is the line in the area above? That was my question. In the big piece? How
Yes,
much?
all the way to Stevens Mill Road. So this
Is it
is,
cut down, or is it the whole thing all the way over to hotel and, that's
are
what I
you
was...
talking about the parcel that he owns or the
Correct.
parcel that he's looking? Yes, so
The
the parcel
whole
that
piece.
he owns, he can clarify, I don't believe it's the whole parcel at this point, I believe it comes down here, but
Yeah, and then goes up to that corner.
here to here, here?
To your left here.
Here?
Right there, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Audrey, if he's making the entry on Garfield, I have no problem with that, but I do have a problem with, it is going to be used for going in and out of local vehicles also, I take it?
Well, I would imagine so, yes.
All right. And there would be some sort of sound absorbing barrier on either side so that the neighbors don't, hear that?
Well, yeah, so currently there are trucks backing up, the beep, 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 and the Y turns and the dieseling that occur in this area currently. So this movement would probably facilitate less noise and air emissions.
Also, it'd be a lot safer for people coming off of Garfield Road there, going into the business than trying to come out Garfield onto Minot and then into the business. So I have no problem with that.
Yeah, I also feel it would be much safer, obviously, the new proposal.
What's the distance from the corner of Garfield and Minot to what would be the new entrance?
This here,
Yes.
let me see, that's a good question. For some reason.
I didn't see staff had any concerns so far as the number of feet from the current cut or anything like that.
We did talk about it. It was reviewed at development review. We looked at accidents and other traffic issues, and it was fairly minor. As you would expect, there are a couple of accidents that occurred up here over the 3-year period, but nothing significant. Let me get you some distance here.
Because I'm just thinking of tractor trailers coming out that, and I know the way that people drive in that area. Speeding has been a big issue on Garfield Road, and I would hate to see somebody pulling out of that with a 53-foot trailer and somebody could zip around the corner and have an issue.
Right. But again, I think it'd be a lot safer than that tractor trailer pulling out onto Minot, no matter what.
Here we go. So it looks like it's about 300 feet, 330 feet. Probably 350 to the center line of the entranceway.
Does that meet the requirements? What are the requirements
Yes.
for a curb cut? Okay.
For the entrance, that's more than sufficient.
In the council documents on this, well, first of all, this zoning amendment is coming to us as a council-initiated amendment, correct?
That's correct. The applicant, in the package, you will see that the applicant did put out a rezoning petition and received a high number of signatures. When it was brought to the attention of City Council, they suggested that they would bring it forward, so Belinda Gary directed this to come to the planning board as a support, so the burden is not on the applicant.
In the supporting documentation that was presented to the council, one of the benefits of this proposal would be that the access road onto Garfield could at a later date double as an access road to internal development on the larger interior lot.
Here?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't see that in our current supporting documents.
So, yeah, this is essentially a rezoning request. The actual site design and development is an additional item, but it certainly is within your purview to require that access be enabled to the further parcel in the future if at some date. This is the one primary access point. Clearly, there's access from Stevens Mill, but this is a large area of land, and it's within your
Well,
purview.
it's a large area of land, and if we were to eliminate the southerly exit for what could be a development, we would end up necessitating the use of a cul-de-sac, which is something that is contrary to our current objectives. In fact, it requires a variance in order to use that. So my concern is that we would be putting ourselves in a position that would require us to accept the lesser of two options because we chose to forego what would be the most appropriate option. So to that end, also, would the road design would not come to either the planning board or the council because it would be a driveway, and those things don't need to be approved.
Well, it would be a site plan that would come through administrative review. However, with,
So it wouldn't come before the board. So there's no way that we could require that that entrance be built to city standards, to city road standards, because also access to development. I guess what I'm getting at is if that is not built to city standards, it cannot be used as an access to residential development.
it can be used as a driveway, but until and unless there is a road for development, then it would have to be upgraded to city standards, correct?
Okay. Additionally, I have a question. Why is rezoning required to meet the goal of adding an additional exit?
So your question is, can the applicant currently put a drive through his residential property to access his land?
Yes.
And I would say generally, that would be okay. However, with the volume of, or the potential volume of commercial and truck traffic, it would be much more important for it to be commercially zoned to facilitate overall site design.
Overall site design with
For the
regard to,
For the circulation of trucks, I believe the applicant can probably answer the question better in terms of overall plans for this area, but because you would have trucks going through this area as a residential lot, there may be some circulation here that he would need to address that would extend his commercial activity into the suburban residential zone across lot lines.
would he be prohibited from expanding a parking lot into the additional zone if it does not have?
Yeah, you cannot put a parking lot in a residential zone as a standalone use.
You can, however, have an access road.
You can access your property through another zone, correct?
Okay. So this is not necessarily required. This just makes it easier.
Potentially.
Yeah,
I know I'm putting staff in a hard spot by
yeah, no, I
asking.
think it was a determination that was made by staff that you can't access a commercial business through a residential parcel, that both parcels need to be zoned commercial to be able to access.
What was that determination based?
Primarily because this would be commercial traffic moving through at a variety of volumes between traditional hours of operation.
And is that prohibited in the ordinance?
I believe so. I do not know that for a fact, but I believe so.
Okay. I have no further
Makes
questions.
sense that it
to say.
would. Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
What time does it get deliveries?
We'll probably have to wait for the applicant, I would assume.
Need to know that.
All right. If there are no more questions of staff, we'd, in this case, it's a council-initiated zone change, and we would expect a representative of the council to be here, but because Mr. Petrocelli is involved, I think it would be appropriate for the board to ask him to come forward as an agent of the applicant. Is the board okay with that?
Yep.
All right. Would you like to come forward, add additional clarifications, information that you think will be helpful for the board to make its determination?
And answer your questions, essentially?
Add information, answer questions. We'd ask that you sit at the mic, speak into the mic, begin by stating your name.
John Petrocelli.
All right, excellent.
Junior.
Thank you very much. And so you could begin by addressing questions that the board had or adding additional information as you see fit.
Yeah, so we do deliveries, accept deliveries from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Those are the hours, Monday through Saturday. We're closed on Sundays. What else were there for questions?
So I have a question. Are you going to expand your yard at all into that area that you're?
Possibly. The reason we kind of chose that was with talking to people in the city, they thought, well, I essentially bought 44 acres to gain that 100 feet. That's the whole purpose of buying it, that's the only option for growth we have, really. But I wanted to ask for a realistic amount of change. I didn't want to, go back into all those house lots to go into commercial. So that was why we kind of squared that off. It affected, I think, only 2 house lots that it touches. So it just seemed like a clean break, and it would give us more room if we needed it down the road. But the 100-foot opening onto Garfield Road is really what we're looking for. Right now, trucks pull in, I don't know if the pictures don't show really, but.
On this one?
Photo you can see, yeah, so you park where those vehicles are, walk across to the front door and then leave. And if there's a 50-foot tractor trailer truck parked there coming back out, that you have to wait, to go back and forth, and it's just, it works, we do it every day, just essentially trying to clean it up and make it safer. And
Is there a light at Garfield Road?
no, I've heard about it for 20 years, but there is not.
Are you going to continue to use both? If this is approved the way you're asking for, are you going to continue to use both as entrance and exit? The existing and the new?
Yes. We've looked at it different ways, but I think after talking to everybody, that's what would make the most sense. I was talking to a gentleman from Turner who said he comes in from the Garfield Road from Turner, so people park, let's say where those 2 cars are, and our storage building is around the front and 200 feet behind, so then they have to essentially pull back out onto that intersection right there, drive back onto Minot Avenue and pull back around. So it's, again, people do it every day, it's just not an ideal situation.
Somebody's going to get hurt somewhere.
We've closed the front parking lot, that's all display now. When, years back, parking was right there, and that helped clean up the parking quite a bit. And I think by getting people out of there, it'll do that again.
Are there additional questions? Thank you very much.
Okay,
We appreciate
thank you.
hearing from you. At this time, I'd be looking for a motion to open the public input section of the hearing.
So moved.
There's a motion, is there a second? Seconded to my right. All those in favor? We'll now open the public input section of the hearing. If there's a member of the public that would like to speak on this topic, please come forward. Begin by clearly speaking your name and address into the mic. Seeing no interest in public input, I would seek a motion to close the public input section of the hearing.
So moved.
Motion on my left, a seconded on my right. All those in favor? At this point, the board will deliberate. I will open it up to whoever would like to start.
I feel it makes sense. I think, if nothing else, safety-wise, Minot Avenue is getting busier and busier. And I've seen it between there and Blackie's and the whole intersection. It's just one less problem that's going to be down the road. My thoughts.
My only concern was what I brought up in regards to the coming off of Minot Avenue onto Garfield Road. 300 feet, I think, is an ample amount of opportunity for people to be paying attention to the road at that point. And if there is an issue, that's something that the city police department can monitor for some future point. There may need to be a light at Garfield Road, but that's not now, and it's not part of this discussion. So I think we're good with the way that it's at.
Yeah. Definitely the lesser of the 2 evils.
Yeah, I'll reiterate, my primary concern with this is just that once built, it's difficult to remove and rebuild to a city municipal standard, and it really would necessitate the use of a cul-de-sac on the remaining residential property in order to develop it. And the comprehensive plan does identify it as an area that the city wants to develop and infill. I would be less concerned if there was some sort of assurance that at least some section of that would be built to city standards that could be tapped into. unfortunately, we're not looking at a site plan. So it's not something that's necessarily appropriate to tack on to an approval at this point. I also think it makes sense. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. Someone who uses Garfield Road, that intersection right there can get sort of busy.
Dangerous.
Dangerous. And I'm just perplexed why the applicant or why Mr. Petrocelli was required to go to such lengths when I myself could find no requirement that this be rezoned in order for him to be able to build a driveway. So, and that's just a personal sort of being irked with regard to this, but that's.
As far as future development, I mean, I understand your point. If you have only one entrance, one method of egress into what might be a new residential facility, but something that I've seen before is in new additions down in Portland is that they've have an emergency entrance for stuff that could come off of it. The road doesn't necessarily have to be a to spec road to be an emergency entrance for a department. So.
Yeah, and it is worth saying that we have done things similar to that in other recent developments as well. So. Well, if no one else is speaking, it sounds like there must be some consensus. I will look for a motion from a member with regard to this topic. You can absolutely just read right there, yep.
I make a motion to recommend approval to the City Council to change the zoning district for the 2.35 acres delineated by the applicant, otherwise known as a portion of PID 217-002, from suburban residential to general business 2, and further recommend amending the general plan land use map to planned commercial development. The Planning Board further recommends changing the zoning and future land use classification of the remainder triangular portion of parcel 217-002 to urban residential and low moderate density residential respectively.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. So that members of the audience understand the process, there are some things that are approved by the board and immediately receive approval with regard to zoning changes. This will now go to the City Council. It will be brought up at workshop. It will be taken from workshop to a regular meeting, and they will have 2 readings. So this process would be expected to take an additional 3 meetings after this. Thank you. Our next item is a public hearing. We will conduct this public hearing the same way that we did our last public hearing. This public hearing is for a proposed Phase 3 expansion of Future Guard at 101 Merrill Road, parcel ID 186-015, to construct a 36,094 square foot addition to the east side of the existing building in 2 phases with a parking area expansion. Phase 3A will add about 18,047 square feet of space at the rear corner of the existing building for 6 new loading docks and additional workspace. Phase 3B will add about 18,047 square feet for production space for product assembly and finish operations. Is staff ready to present their report?
So this proposal, like you said, is for an expansion to the existing Future Guard facility located in the industrial district. Future Guard manufactures retractables, fixed awnings, and screen solutions. They're looking to add about 36,000 square feet to the east side of the existing building for 6 new loading docks, additional workspace, product assembly space, and finish operations. They've been through a few approval processes with the city staff as well as the planning board. And with this addition and construction of the showroom that was approved prior to tonight, the total square footage of the building will be about 216,064 square feet. So in your memo, we went through the performance standards that are required for projects in the industrial district. And we have up there, if you wouldn't mind handing it out, a revised information sheet that kind of helps explain the two landscaping standards for the building footprint and the parking areas that we discussed in the memo. These standards, as described in the memo, require landscaping equal to 10% of the area of the parking lot, and landscaping the perimeter of the principal building in an amount equal to 20% of the building footprint, and it mentions emphasizing the front and sides of the building. Where this project essentially has two fronts on Merrill Road and Hotel Road, it also has two sides based on the way the ordinance is written for a corner lot. Given the footprint of the building, the 216,000 square feet, it would require about 1 acre of landscaping around the perimeter of the building to meet the 20% requirement in the ordinance. One thing that's important to point out is that the ordinance doesn't specifically define the perimeter of the building, so that's something the planning board's going to have to determine when reviewing the landscaping. We asked the applicant to provide us some calculations of the parking area, and it looks like it amounts to about 35,000 square feet. So to meet the 10% requirement for the parking area, they would need to provide about 3,500 square feet of landscaping in the parking areas. And they've shown about 30,000 square feet of landscaping in the front of the building, so they do meet that requirement. Another thing to discuss is that since a large portion of this building was constructed in the 1960s before the landscaping requirements were really in effect, that's about 152,734 square feet, if you want to be exact. The landscaping that's shown on the plan is actually accounting for 20% of this new addition area, plus the previously approved additions and a large portion of that building that existed before these ordinance requirements went into effect. So really, to get down to the math, which is on that information sheet, if we base the landscaping requirement off of the expanded area, it would be alone, not the entire building. It would be a little over 12,000 square feet of landscaping that they need to provide, which they exceed. They also have some forested buffers surrounding the site that the applicant argues will also exceed that landscaping requirement. In addition to the landscaping discussion, there are a few items that came up at the development review meeting that we listed in your memo to coordinate during the planning board process and before the start of construction. The first one was from the airport director. They requested notification 5 to 7 days in advance of the use of cranes for construction. And I guess last time that condition was placed on the approval and they weren't notified, so they were a little upset about that at the development review committee meeting. Unfortunately, there's nothing more the planning board can do other than strongly emphasize that condition. The other one that we heard was from the fire department and code enforcement about the internal building circulation and egress with the proposed addition. They were worried that the travel distance inside the building may be too far to exit if there was an emergency. And that's something that they can coordinate during the building permit process with them. And lastly, as you mentioned in the memo, they're requesting an extension from the October of 2018 approval to be able to complete the factory expansion before adding the showroom area onto the building. So that's just a separate item that the board will have to rule on. And that's all that we have right now. So.
Questions for the staff? I do have a question regarding conditions. If a condition is placed on a site plan, it is understood that it must be followed.
Correct.
If an applicant were to not meet conditions, say, for parking spaces, what would city staff do?
Under what circumstance?
Let's say we had conditions specific to parking spaces, they didn't meet them. They didn't, those conditions were not met. What would be our recourse as a municipality?
Are you talking about something that you required at the time of the plan approval that was
Correct.
not implemented?
Correct.
Typically, there is a bond that's a performance bond, and before a certificate of occupancy can be released, the requirements of the conditions of approval need to be met before that bond is released. Typically, that's a tool that's used in the larger development projects.
How does that apply to a situation like this in which an applicant cannot really go back? And if the building is erected, you're not going to bring cranes back and then say, oh, now we've informed the airport that we've done this. Is there recourse?
It depends on the nature of the item. In the instance of parking, we would be sending a letter of enforcement. We would be working with the applicant to determine the reasons why it's not met. In some cases, it's because there's no need, like they may not need the extra parking spaces. It could be that they really do need to meet the parking spaces, and it's a matter of timing. So we will generally try to work with the applicant to determine the reason why those
Right, and the reason I brought up
conditions aren't
parking
met.
spaces, because that's something I think that we can all wrap our heads around in terms of remediation. But how is a situation like this remediated? What recourse
In this
is
case,
there?
we'd have to get notified by the airport that there's a crane in the air and go out there that same day and request that they take it down and notify the airport and not continue construction for 7 days.
Okay,
That's the only way that and unless the airport calls us and tells us, hey, they've got a crane in the air and we weren't notified, we won't know. So we really rely on them to let us know.
Now, I'm trying to remember why this was placed on as a condition. Was it placed as a condition as a courtesy to the airport, or is it a requirement that the
It's-
airport,
yeah,
is an
it's-
FAA requirement?
Yeah, it's
FAA.
on runway 23, the approach to runway 22 or 23. I don't know the technical airport
22.
terms, but yeah, so they need that to.
So, and would they be required to do that even if we did not include it as a condition? Because it is also covered under FAA rules?
Yes, but because we try to be as comprehensive as possible in addressing all issues related to construction and final occupation, we would hopefully have it addressed.
Okay.
Audrey, what's the construction of the building? Is it wood or is it bar joists, beams, what?
I believe it is concrete construction, but the agent's applicant is here, so the applicant's agent is here, so he may be able to answer your construction questions regarding materials.
Any other questions? All right, at this point, the board would invite the applicant, or in this case, agent of the applicant, to come forward. Please state your name. Provide any information you believe would be important for us to know.
Good evening, my name is Mike Gatto, I'm here to represent Fugigard Holdings. The building additions are metal Murox design, they're panelized buildings with steel joists and a flat roof.
So you're going to need a crane.
Yeah, there clearly was a crane used in the first construction, and I'm not exactly sure why the airport wasn't noticed, but, you know, I did provide the information to the client. I've already spoken with the builder on this one again, and we will try to make sure that they comply.
You'll need a crane. So,
Other than that, I can answer, Megan's done a great job on the landscaping. I think we meet your criteria. We have some other graphics. If you want to see more about it, we can talk about it. If you're comfortable, we don't need to. So I'll leave it up to you.
Well, I think that would be more of a question for staff. I know staff is always busy, but do you feel you have the time to review, to adequately review this without planning board direction? If we were to, it's one of the proposed conditions of approvals that a landscape plan be provided to staff for review. I heard Megan say that she perhaps would like some direction from the planning board. So I'm directly asking, would you prefer to proceed with direction from the planning board, or do you feel comfortable, or do you feel direction is necessary? guess
I
is the
think
question.
direction is necessary as to whether or not you would apply that requirement to the entire building, including the portion that was there in the 1960s, or just the additions. Because they certainly exceed it for the additions, and if you include the surrounding forested areas, they also exceed it for that existing building. So really, I think we're all set. It was just a matter of, we had the plan in front of us, we weren't sure how they meet the landscaping requirements. We wanted to get the memo out to the planning board, and now we're kind of speaking with the applicant, looking at the parking, and it sounds like it's all set, but at the time of writing the memo, it was a question mark, so.
So you feel comfortable that that's been addressed?
Yeah, yeah.
And that was my point. I thought staff and I had addressed, we meet the criteria. But if you don't think we do, we've got more data we can share with you.
Well, I think that would be a question for board members. Does anyone feel the requirements are not met? or
No,
they would like
and
to
I
see
feel if the
something done differently?
staff has, looked into it is comfortable with it as is, I'd feel the same.
Good.
Any other questions for Mr. Gatto? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this point, I'll seek a motion to open the public input section of the hearing. Motion to my right, is there a second? Second to my left. All those in favor? At this point, the public input section of this hearing is open. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak or address the board on this topic? As you come forward, please begin by stating your name and address and clearly speaking into the mic.
Thank you. It feels odd to be on the other side.
Right? Yeah.
Elfrida Fournier, 33 Cherryvale Circle, Auburn, and I'm here as a citizen. And I just wanted to speak to this business. First of all, I want to say that what I hear over and over and over again from people is that Auburn is not a business-friendly city. And I think we need to do what we can to maintain our businesses, to support them, and to entice businesses to come to Auburn. I speak frequently with our small business people here in the inner part of the city. These folks just put in an awning so that I wouldn't burn up inside my house that I bought 2.5 years ago to be next to my son. I'm still in Auburn, of course, but they just did such a fantastic job, and they pay so many dollars of taxes here year after year after year, and they pay them on time, and they're very good business people, and they're very good citizens here in this city. And I hope that whatever we do, we can listen to what their concerns are, what they need, and to support them and promote them, because I don't see everybody breaking through to come into Auburn to do business. And I certainly would like to have the support for these folks from all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional members? Please come forward.
Raleigh Heckathorn, 8 Littlefield Road. We live directly across Hotel Road from this proposed project. We've lived there since 1983, and we've seen over the years increased traffic flow to the point of sometimes we actually live on the corner of Hotel and what is now called Littlefield Road. It used to be Merrill Road Extension. Sometimes it takes us several minutes to be able to get into traffic, and then sometimes we just have to just kind of bolt out and hang on to our hats to be able to get into traffic, to either go right or left toward the turnpike or into downtown Auburn. So we're concerned that, is there any idea of putting a traffic light to handle what I would assume is going to be increased traffic due to the expansion of this project? There will be new employees, which is a great benefit to the town, to the city. However, the traffic flow is at about a maximum right now. Hotel Road is supposed to be a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit. Anybody who actually travels that road knows that it's very seldom obeyed. So I'm just, as a concerned citizen and someone who uses that intersection all the time, my wife and I are quite concerned about what is this intersection's plan for the future.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak on this topic? Seeing none, I'll seek a motion to close the public input section of the hearing. Motion is made on my left. Is there a second?
Second.
Second also from my left. All those in favor? At this point, the board will deliberate. I'll start by saying, normally we don't specifically respond to public comment. I will say that unfortunately in this specific instance, the traffic light would be well off the site, and so I'm not sure that the planning board would have authority to require one. However, I think that it's an important concern, and that I think that members of the planning board would possibly be amenable to drafting a letter in conjunction with any action we take on the project, asking the council to specifically look at a traffic light for that intersection. So that's something that I think we could do. So that with regard to that specific concern.
Just to clarify, why do you say it's well off the site?
It is something, because that is something
Not near
that,
the building.
no, but that a traffic light is going to be built in the public right of way.
Okay.
And so it's going to be owned by the city, and so essentially, like, we can't ask the applicant to build a city light. That's basically what happens. Yeah.
Okay, I understand.
What's the impact on traffic based on this expansion? Do we know? Vehicle
It's 10 to 20 additional employees.
Okay. So
In
it's
terms
only
of trip
adding
and
to.
shifts and stuff, I don't think we have that information. I'm not sure if the applicant can elaborate more on that.
Sure, if you think you can speak to that specifically.
In the application, we indicated that there would be additional probably 10 to 20 employees on this operation. So that typically would not trigger a traffic movement permit that would require any review. We have 90 now.
Would any further truck trips be generated by this expansion of the facility?
I don't know that I've asked that specific question, but I am not anticipating that there would be a large increase of truck traffic, because he's building different products with the same materials he's bringing in.
Well, my hope is that they would increase production if they're expanding, so my assumption would be that there would be additional trucks, but...
Well, Phase 3A is to build 6 new loading docks, right?
Yes.
Yes, and the idea is that they leave the trucks in the docks and fill them up as they go. And so they want, because they're having different orders and different stuff going on. So they wanted more. They have 2 now on that side of the building. They have a drive-through on the other side now. Used to have 2 loading docks over on the other side. But the last expansion, we did a drive-through so that the product, 30-foot product, could be loaded into a building without rooms with columns. So I guess when you look at it, if they do increase production, then they would increase truck trips to that. But I don't believe it's going to be an increase that would trigger any kind of traffic movement permit or anything, which would be 50 trucks a day, or peak hour, I mean. So again, I don't think it's going to be, they're doing a lot of business as it is right now. And most of the space we're adding is for machinery, because we can't find enough people to do the work that we need done.
And I feel the existing truck traffic on that road now is from the other businesses, not this one. You got Pepsi, you got, that's where the trucks are.
Well, it's also a major cut-through.
Right, for everybody else.
For everybody else coming in from the mine and breaking off to go south ahead of it. But I do think
That really has nothing to do.
it has nothing to do with the business, but I think a letter to that.
Yeah, I think it's
to the
incredible.
board
I think it
would
would be
be
appropriate, yeah.
worthwhile for the whole intersection in general.
Yeah.
Because with the traffic that goes through there, I have pity for the young man there that lives right there on the corner, because when I was the postmaster in town, 2 of my vehicles got hit in that intersection. So yes, they could use a traffic control there.
If I may, I agree that that letter would be important, because we are looking at, or I am looking at other projects in that neighborhood, and it would be good to address that traffic issue if it could be addressed, and I think the council could look at it. I've already talked with staff about, maybe they should be doing something with the TIF on this. The client hasn't asked for a TIF, but they should do something with the increased investment this client's making to pay for those improvements.
Yeah,
So I think if you were to speak up saying there was input, it might be helpful for the whole process.
It's worth looking at. It's important for all of us to remember that Merrill Road has additional area for commercial development on it. So
Absolutely.
it certainly could be built up more, and it does make sense for us to ask for a traffic light.
And there is additional right-of-way at this intersection on our side to help facilitate lanes or something that might be necessary.
If I can jump in here, I remember the last time this came before the board, we were quite excited. It is not often that we see a manufacturing facility that is actually at a location that has historically been home to a manufacturing facility expanding. So we were happy to see, if anyone remembers, for a while this was an Etonic shoe factory. And so I think this is the sort of project that we like to see. It just happens to be unfortunate that Merrill Road is one of those industrial areas that intersects with our residential zones, but that projects like this, in my mind, are worthwhile. I like to see that we are adding manufacturing jobs, particularly in a niche industry. The awnings are not something that are made everywhere by everyone. And I like the idea that these types of jobs tend to have longevity for those employees and tend to pay something more in line with a livable wage, which I think is also important for us to be promoting when we look at what we allow and what we don't allow. So that's my brief plug. Is there any other input?
No, just wondering what the next steps are in crafting that letter, or what the time, is that with city staff, or we do that collectively as a board?
Well, we could do that collectively. We could ask city staff to draft something that we sign. We could assign it to a specific member who would then forward it to staff, and staff would send it to all members for feedback, and that we would then sign. We could send it as a letter signed simply by the chairperson. There are lots of options. So I think given the amount that we ask, so I think that we should discuss it after we take a vote, but I think we should discuss it directly after.
And probably not place that on the staff, because
I
they have
agree.
enough.
That's what I was going to say. They do enough for us already. I think one of us can step up. So. Remember, we are looking at two motions, and we will make those motions separately. Is there anyone that would like to make a motion with regard to this site?
Well, I make a motion that, and you'll have to forgive me because I don't have my glasses, the board grant the one-year extension to allow the applicant to move forward with the October of 2018 site plan approved, issued by staff.
Motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second on my left. Discussion? Seeing no discussion, we'll take a vote. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Is there a second motion?
I make a motion to, this is going to be long and involved, to approve the site plan for Phase 3 expansion of Future Guard at 101 Merrill Road to construct a 36,094 square foot addition to the east side of the existing building in 2 phases with a parking expansion and the following conditions. No development activity until any bonding or inspection fees is determined by the Auburn Engineering Department due to the vicinity of the stream and the need for the PBR. This will require city inspection and triggers the bonding and inspection fee. Item 2, a double row of erosion controls will be required to protect all critical areas such as streams and wetlands during any earth disturbance and construction. Item 3, the Auburn Airport shall be notified a minimum of 5 days in advance of any crane higher than 75 feet in height used on site. Item 4, the internal building circulation shall be reviewed by the fire department and code enforcement before the issuance of a building permit. And item 5, a landscaping plan shall be provided to staff to review that meets Section 65793G of the city's Code of Ordinances before the issuance of a certificate of occupancy.
There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Second to my left. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, we'll take it to a vote. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think before we move on to the next public hearing, we'll discuss the letter quickly. I think that it can be a letter that is quite short. Whoever drafts the letter needs to include the desire to build, to construct a traffic light fixture at that intersection to control traffic, and that we include reasons why we believe that is the case. For instance, there is a current proposed increase in traffic at that intersection, and that the Merrill Road industrial area has the capacity for additional development. So, in the past, normally the chairperson does the letter. I can do that unless someone is interested in writing the letter, I guess. That's sort of one of the...
Sounds good.
Yeah, it's one of the perks. Okay, so my personal opinion is that, well, let me ask. I think it would be nice if this letter were signed by each individual member of the board. I think that that would add a personal touch to include associate members. To that end, I will draft a letter in the next day or two, forward it to staff for review. If staff finds it amenable, I'll ask them to forward it to board members. Board members can directly email only staff with any edits, okay? So no reply alls. My assumption that those edits would be not content, but clerical, and that the letter be made available for each of us to come in and sign, possibly next week, during the week. Does that work?
That works. I would like to also suggest that as part of this letter, there be a request to review the road and infrastructure plan for both Merrow and Hotel Road. Just in looking at the ADT, or the average daily traffic counts for Hotel Road, they're over 10,000 ADT. In comparison to Washington Street pairs, each of those roads, that two-lane freeway, those are only 8,000 counts a day. So as a comparison for infrastructure purposes, carrying trucks and that many trips, it would be good to review the CIP and the infrastructure and road transportation plan for both of those roads.
I apologize. Can you repeat those numbers? That way I don't have to ask you to send those later.
The ADT for Hotel Road, just within a block or so of this facility, is over 10,000. And Washington Street, as a comparison, is around 8,000. Minot Avenue at the intersection with Haskell Hill is around 10 to 15,000. I can review those ADTs and get you a map if that's important or relevant.
I think that's a wonderful suggestion on the part of the staff. Is the board amenable to adding that into the letter?
Definitely.
We all agree. Any information that you think could make a stronger case with regard to that, I'd love to receive maybe sometime tomorrow when you get a chance, and I'll make sure to put that in the letter. I think that's a great suggestion. Does the board have any other questions with regard to the letter? No. All right, excellent. Our next item is a public hearing to review discussion and recommendations to the City Council regarding the adoption of the statewide timber harvest standards in the shoreland overlay zone, and we will conduct this public hearing the same way that we did our previous hearing. Is the staff ready?
Yes, yes. I want to, in advance of this, distribute a letter in regards to this item that was addressed to the Planning Board and City Councils from the Conservation Commission in regards to their recommendation. So as has been reviewed and discussed in previous meetings and with the joint meeting with the Conservation Commission, what's before you tonight is the question of a recommendation regarding the ordinance change for the timber harvest section of the shoreland zoning overlay district, Chapter 60, Article 13, Division 5, Section 60-1003 specifically. The state, as you know, has requested all communities to state how they are going to implement the state standards. In discussion, we reviewed options 1, 2, and 3, and 1 being the complete repeal of Section 003, which is about 1.5 pages of text currently in the shoreland zone. And in its place, the state timber harvest ordinance would serve as our timber harvest ordinance in the shoreland zone overlay. That is option 1. Option 2 is an approach to creatively resolve the balance of both adopting the state standards and incorporating that in its entirety into our code and determining a shared responsibilities between the city and the state and creating a joint agreement. The third option is to relinquish all assistance from the state and amend our ordinance to address the state standards and administrative and enforcement capabilities. The staff recommends that the city adopt or move to adopt option 1 and repeal section 1003 from the current shoreland zone overlay district, enabling the State Forest Service to administer and enforce timber harvests in the SLO. We feel that regardless of the potential land area or forest management activity that could occur in these areas of the city, this work requires a specialized skill set that we do not currently have in-house. Option 2, adoption of the code in its entirety with a joint agreement with the state on implementation, review, and enforcement would appear to gain little and cost both time and money to both arrive at a joint agreement as well as to implement. Option 3 should probably only be undertaken by jurisdictions with either a large tree harvesting industry and local professional staff, or contracted experts in the logging industry, or those with limited SLO and/or forests. So there would be no need for Forest Service assistance and limited to no impact to watersheds. What we are asking at this point is for the Planning Board to make a recommendation to City Council on how to proceed.
Other questions for the staff? There are no applicants other than ourselves, essentially, or I guess we could say the City Council. And unless Ms. Fournier would like to, is there anything that you would like to say as the City Council asking for this recommendation? Yeah. Normally, we would allow for an applicant. In this case, we are being asked simply to provide some clarification to council. So, because you happen to be here, in deference to your position, I'm going to ask if you would like to speak with regard to this. You are not required to, do not feel compelled to, but because you're here, I'd like to provide that option for you if you so choose.
I just feel it's so soon to be talking about this. You know, I think there's so much to it. Again, Alfreda Fournier, City Councilor, 33 Cherryvale Circle. I think at this point, we have had a number of meetings over the past couple of years, and we just seem to be going round and round and round. And I would like to see ducks in a row before we hand this over to you, because I don't know if you've had any guidance in terms of what your job is.
Okay. We're talking about the timber harvesting.
The timber harvest.
Yeah, I realized immediately you
Oh,
were
I'm
speaking
sorry.
about that.
I'm skipping ahead to another thing.
Yeah.
Well, I really can't respond to the
Okay.
timber harvest,
All right.
you know.
Okay.
I know that I would like to, you know, I can't respond on behalf of the city council because we have not had any discussions on
Okay.
that.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the offer.
In that case, I'd be seeking a motion for the public input section of the hearing. To open the public input. Is there a second?
Second.
Second on my right. All those in favor? Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak to this topic? Please state your name and address before beginning. Thank you.
I'm Bill Sylvester. I live at 1128 Riverside Drive, and I've recommended that, number one. I think there was some questions in one of the other meetings about how many acres this would actually be. I threw out an off-the-cuff thing of 15%. That's like a couple thousand acres. You've got a 250-foot zone all the way around Lake Auburn, 250-foot zone all the way along Androscoggin on one side, and both sides of the Little Androscoggin. Feeder brooks that dry up have a 75-foot zone on them, and all the brooks that run. So that's 150 feet wide. There's a lot of land in this, and this is all free. The state does it, and it doesn't require anything out of the town. So that's my thought about that zone.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak on this topic? Seeing none, I would seek a motion to close the public input section of the hearing.
Make a motion to close the public input.
Motion on my
Second.
left. Is there a second? Second on my right. All those in favor? I think it's safe to say that the board has made a decision already, although it's not a formal one, and that I would ask that in understanding that we will put forth a recommendation to choose option one, that the remainder of this discussion not focus on which option to choose, but rather develop the findings that we will use to justify our choice.
It seems like city staff is stretched pretty thin as it is, and this is a great way to just reduce the burden on them and take advantage of a free service.
And I agree in seeing the amount of land that would actually impact being what I felt was minimal. I just couldn't find a reason why we wouldn't use option one.
Well, I think there were two issues too, right? And Audrey, you can clarify that city staff is overburdened in terms of the workload, but also that the expertise in order to perform the service is not available on city staff currently. Is that correct?
Correct. This is a very logging-specific skill set, and it's best left to the professionals to make determinations on DBA and coverage.
We also noted that commercial forestry is not a large economic sector here in our community.
Just to answer any further questions, I just popped up our shoreland zoning over the southern portion, and you can see highlighted in light green, dark green, and blue. The light green is potential resource protection areas that would be impacted, and the dark green is the 250. What this shows you is where some of these reviews may occur, given forest coverage. But some of these may already be covered by the current state logging regulations.
The board ready to make a motion? Is that what?
Yes, and I'm going to ask that, I'm taking notes on what I've heard. I'll say them out loud to see if they match what the board was saying. I apologize, I'm not a particularly fast writer. Okay. That our reasoning behind this would be that option 1 aids in reducing the burden on staff and allows us to utilize free state services and resources. That the expertise is not currently available on city staff to administer options 2 or 3 effectively. And that it was our understanding that commercial forestry is not a large enough sector of our local economy to justify the required investments to implement options 2 or 3 effectively. Do we feel that those have captured the
That makes a ton of
sentiment
sense.
of the board?
Yep.
I think I have these written out. I can provide exactly as I stated them. If we would like to use those, I would just say whoever makes the motion can reference these because they've been spoken in the public record, or I can pass them to you, whoever would like to make the motion. It's up to you. But that they be included as our reasons for choosing number 1.
I guess, so we could take it in consideration, chairperson's bullet points.
Yep.
I make a motion to recommend to City Council that they choose option 1 to repeal section 60-1003 timber harvest and thereby defer the regulation of timber harvesting activities occurring in the Shoreline Overlay Zoning District to the State Bureau of Forestry.
Second.
The motion, the second, is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. All right.
I'd just like to also comment about our process. I thought it was really beneficial for us to have that joint meeting with the Conservation Commission. I thought that it allowed us to avoid duplication and have good open conversation and really come to consensus quickly. So I thought it was a great practice and something that we should try to emulate with further ordinance questions.
I agree,
or
that
zoning
was
questions.
very beneficial.
Yeah, as a background, Audrey and I spoke about creating those opportunities, and we thought that the two of us thought that was sort of some low-hanging fruit, and that's sort of where that developed, the idea being that you can't build a culture of cooperation without first, cooperating. So we thought that this was probably we thought the timber harvest one was again, for lack of better terms, a low-hanging fruit, somewhere where we could find some consensus and positive working together. So, all right, the next item is a public hearing to review discussion and recommendations to the City Council regarding the creation, composition, and roles and responsibilities outlined in the draft Division 8 Agriculture Committee. We will conduct this public hearing using the same format that we have conducted our previous public hearings. To that end, is staff ready to present their report.
Yes, and just as a note, both planning board members Katie Boss and John Engler did serve on the committee that finally created this draft language, so that while that is in your staff report, I just want to make that notice, so if they feel like contributing further to the staff report and the discussion of this item, I just wanted to give you that heads up that they are somewhat knowledgeable. So as you are no doubt aware, through the winter, there's been quite a bit of discussion regarding the Agricultural and Resource Conservation District, and a unanimous recommendation from various committees over the last several years has created a consensus recommendation that there be some form of an agricultural committee created, and this is the result of several efforts over the years to have an ongoing body oversee, support, and advise City Council and the Planning Board on agriculture, forestry, and resource protection issues and initiatives. This would be the creation of a permanent committee, and the draft language would be added as Division 8 to our current municipal charter, which establishes committees and boards. Yours, the Planning Board, is obviously one of those as well. This would be on a parallel to the Conservation Commission in terms of the nature of its roles and activity. I have attached in the staff report both the draft language coming from the committee as well as an additional item that we received from Christopher Carson on February 27th, what that was delivered to the City Council as well as the Sun Journal. I thought it was relevant that the Planning Board also be informed of this information moving forward, so that everyone had the same information through discussion. The text essentially outlines policies, practices, and reviews. It establishes how the committee would be formed in terms of consisting of 9 members appointed by City Council, 2/3 of whom shall be residents of the city, with highest priority given to selecting 5 or more members who own land or are actively engaged in agriculture or forestry in the zoned land for agricultural and resource protection. The terms of office, 3 years. Further qualifications that all members of the committee be selected upon the basis of their active involvement, skill, or expertise in agriculture, forestry, wildlife protection or preservation, conservation of natural resources, food system economics, public policy, or related fields. 2/3 of the members of the committee shall be residents of the city. That further moves to discuss powers and duties. There's an extensive list. Essentially, they would be making recommendations to Planning Board and City Council and consult with the Conservation Commission regarding ongoing needs in protecting farms, forestry, farmland, woodlots, and building a stronger food, agricultural, and resource economy in Auburn. They would work on promotion, promoting opportunities for farm financing, natural resource business development proposals, conservation, and there are a total of 11 items in terms of what the working group recommended. Review applications for a voluntary municipal farm support program, perform related duties, periodically review the Auburn Comprehensive Plan, ordinances, and land use trends that relate to agriculture and forestry in order to identify potential barriers and opportunities, research methods, best practices, and successful policies that other communities are using to strengthen and support agricultural and forestry. It is a long list of potential activities. The officers' meetings and records. It's a straight membership type of a form where there's an election of a chair and a vice chair and a secretary. The meetings, of course, would be open to the public and notices given. The committee can request testimony during public hearings in front of the committee, and all minutes would be kept. It is a fairly short two-page summary of the committee, but essentially stating that they can appoint sub-working groups and that they would operate on a quorum basis. There's no requirement in terms of the number of meetings, the length of meetings, or specific task assigned at this point. It is a fully formed committee for recommendations and advisory in nature to work and consult with the planning board and the city council. So the action requested before you tonight should review the proposed committee purpose, composition, scope of work, responsibilities, potential work products or tasks, time commitments, potentially being asked of committee members, potential staff support, the committee's relationship to you, the planning board, and to city council, and discuss and prepare a recommendation to city council on the draft ordinance.
Overall, it seems fairly straightforward, but I guess one of the questions I would have is, how would that operate? Does the applicant come before, do you send the applicant to the agricultural committee? Then they make their recommendation, and then they both come back to us to meet before the planning board, or does it go from the applicant to the planning board to the committee and then back to the planning board?
So I think there's some confusion. At this juncture, there is no applicant that would be suggested in a review here. They would be a support and consulting body as per this draft. So they would be researching topics and essentially making recommendations to support and actively support farming, forestry, agriculture. So that's currently what's in the text. You, as a planning board, could request they work on something, and they could obviously generate their own work product that they would want to share with you and have decisions and recommendations on.
I'm going to defer my question to Mr. Engler and Mrs. Boss, actually. I find that with regard to the Conservation Commission, one of the biggest things that schnookers them on a regular basis is what I would consider a lack of reasonable access to staff resources. And was there any discussion as this document was being reviewed in the meeting that you attended with regard to that topic?
Not that I recall. No, and in actuality, to the best of my recall, we did not significantly alter the draft in the meeting that I attended with Ms. Boss.
We took out any reference to adjudication, so that was the largest shift, where previously it was about having an applicant come before the Agricultural Committee to review and approve or deny a request, and we've removed all reference to that. I do think it would be valuable still to have the Agricultural Committee be a little bit more along the lines of the Complete Streets Committee, where they do look at site plans for intersections and changes proposed, and they provide their recommendations to City Council.
So I guess follow-up question, though, would be, I'm a bit dismayed. When that meeting was presented to me, it was presented as though planning board was being invited to be able to provide significant might be the wrong word, but meaningful feedback. Did you get the impression that your purpose there was to provide additional feedback, or was it sort of already decided? Let me rephrase that, because that is asking you to answer a poor question. Do you feel that one of the purposes of the meeting was to actively gather additional input from the planning board?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We parsed through the entire document.
Okay.
But as folks may recall from the joint city council planning board meeting, the language around adjudication was the most controversial, and so a lot of our discussion did center around that topic. I think that your insight that resourcing is a significant issue for the Conservation Commission, which I was not aware of, that I think that is something that perhaps we should have considered. I certainly didn't think about that in the context of the conversation we had.
Other questions for staff or the planning board members that were present at the meeting?
May I ask you to consider a couple of items in your discussion which occur to me? There's a long list of potential tasks and scope that this committee could undertake, similar to what the Conservation Commission could undertake in its purview and its scope of work. However, as any committee and commission, you know, as a planning board, when you meet once a month for an hour or two, the actual volume of work that you can accomplish is somewhat limited and based on the capacity of the members themselves, especially if it is not fully staffed with someone working full-time to help address their research and drafting needs. So I think it's important in creating any committee or commission that you fully have your expectations for such a committee or commission met. What your expectations are in terms of time, effort, and accomplishment in terms of their purpose.
Yeah, I thought some of the things that were listed were nigh impossible if they don't have access to municipal staff and a funding source. My impression was that they were really being set up to do some things that would be quite difficult without some sort of realistic scope being applied to what was written. So I'm glad that you bring that up.
Are you referring to the current proposal or the previous proposal? And
No, the current
elements?
proposal. And I think maybe I will wait to sort of identify those till after we hear from the public, maybe. I think it might be best to hear what everyone has to say before we start kind of going into the weeds. I think it could help give us perspective to hear from other folks first. Having said that, is there a motion to open the public input section of the hearing?
Make a motion, open the public.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? We invite you to come speak to us on this topic. If you do, please speak your name clearly into the mic, including your address, before you begin.
Good evening. I'm Jan Phillips, and I live in Auburn on West Shore Road. And what I'd like to suggest, and what I am struck by in this, is that in the purpose section, you still carry natural resources as a full participant. And when you come down to powers and duties, natural resources seems to exit and not make much of an appearance. And when I'm thinking about natural resources, I think it's important, and I don't see this as in competition with agricultural or forestry. I think some of our best folks in terms of thinking about natural resources and their protections and their value to the city are farmers and foresters. I'm drawn back in the further part of this, the accompanying letter that Audrey included in terms of the agriculture and resource protection district language. The purposes of this district are to allow for conservation of natural resources and open space land and encourage agricultural, forestry, and certain types of recreational uses. And then in bold, it's declared to be in the public interest that these areas should be protected and conserved because of their natural, aesthetic, and scenic value. And I'd like to see, not that language, but at least in down here in powers and duties 1, for sure, I'd love to see natural resources reinserted. And there are other places in terms of those 11 that I think it's worth including that in the language. I don't think it changes the nature of the powers and duties, but I think it foregrounds our natural resources. And that's important because, as you know, we have watersheds in that area, and we have other parts of the city that where merely the wooded nature or the open space nature are important to our quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to come forward and speak?
Hello, I'm Mary Sylvester. I live at 208 Maple Hill Road. I was the chair of the first ad hoc committee and had the opportunity to work with Crossroads Consulting, who did such important work for us. I'd like to speak in support of the general flow of this proposal. I was pleased when the planning board has already gone forward with their recommendation that there be an agricultural committee, joining with so many other groups that have in fact endorsed this plan. What exactly it should do, of course, became the complex part of this. And I do support its advisory role, largely as it is articulated here. I bring to your attention the importance of, and the list of, the long list, it's like almost every job description any of us have ever had, do everything, mostly really well all the time. But numbers 2 and 3 are really right out of the Crossroads report. Which remind us that what makes for a successful agricultural sector, which was the point of the Crossroads report, has something to do with land use policies, yes, but a lot also to do with encouraging markets, which is really what number 2 tries to remind us that the Agricultural Committee will also do, and number 3, which is coordinating and collaborating to assist with education. And so when you look at the top 3 or even 4 of their responsibilities, they have a lot to do with how that sector will flourish. And it is in fact directly out of Crossroads recommendations. So I think you have a really good template here for the in somewhat of, like many job descriptions, a prioritized sense of how things would play out, because I think the groups are taking very seriously what Crossroads has recommended to us. The key of course, they'll be making recommendations to the planning board and to council. You can draw on them. And I'll simply wrap up by saying that part of my work in that first committee as a listener and facilitator is I realized how much there still is to learn from people who are actively involved in agriculture. And in one of the presentations that you had here, I was pleased to have a chance to be in the audience when Stephanie Gilbert came. Maine is extremely lucky to have the kind of talent that she represents. And one of her recommendations, as you know, on how we help agriculture is to listen to farmers. Turns out they know a lot about how to make agriculture, particularly 21st century agriculture, succeed. It is, like everything in our world, rapidly changing and doesn't look very much like what young people say is 20th century stuff. So I think we are have an opportunity to engage knowledgeable people. I myself learned a great deal from listening to farmers in this process. Crossroads report was built on listening to 95 farmers in the interviews they conducted. And I think this is giving us the tools. I was pleased in the spirit of collaboration to see that it was developed by council and planning board. working together, and that your work together in the future will help us be a successful committee with many people who are really passionate, as you know. Thanks.
Are there any other members of the public that would like to come forward and speak at this time?
It's on the committee, too.
I'm Bill Sylvester. I live 1128 Riverside Drive, Auburn. I was on both those committees, and that Crossroads recommendations were good. A lot of their information, you got to be kind of careful how you use it. I want to make a comment on vocabulary or definition here. It's probably not a great deal, but natural resources don't include agriculture. Agriculture uses natural resources. Forestry is a natural resource. It would be here whether man was here or not. Agriculture, milking powers, chemicals, food, that's all stuff we make, and it's not a natural resource. You can live off the land, but you won't be living off beef or grown things like that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this whole thing needs to be reviewed before you take the recommendation that we had in the Mag Art Committee and go with it. It needs a good revamping. I think a committee would be the way to do that. Another thing that I've always complained about was the fact that in that ag zone, there's 74% forest. And we need about 74% foresters on that ag committee. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to come forward and speak on this topic? Seeing none, I'll seek a motion to close the public input section of this hearing.
Motion.
Moved.
Motion to
Is there a
close.
second?
Second.
Second on my left. All those in favor? I hope that the sparse audience is a, no, I'm saying, I hope that there are a few of you here because in general we're trusted. I guess is what I'm saying. It's always better to hear from more than less, but yeah. So, to that end, I think that in moving through this, the planning board first has to decide, are we going to, are there specific goals that we think this language should achieve with regard to any committee in general within the city? For instance, one goal that I would say is that the language must provide clearly delineated explanations of the supports that the committee is likely to receive from staff. If you look at the city ordinance for the planning board, you'll see that Audrey is not here because she chooses to be here.
Come on.
She's here because she must be by law. And not that she and Megan wouldn't choose to be here.
I would volunteer.
Not that she and Megan wouldn't choose to be here, but that those responsibilities to this committee are clearly delineated in the ordinance. Staff's responsibility to this committee. I think that one goal of any ordinance regarding committees should be to describe staff commitment to that committee. And that's my personal opinion. Is that something that the rest of the board feels should be a goal?
Yes.
I would add a second goal then.
Yes.
I think we have to think about how this commission and where the boundaries would be around its wheelhouse, so to speak, and what it has power over or advisory role over. and other commissions that already exist, because I've never actually read the charter of the Conservation Commission. I'm not very familiar with its work. But if we take the public comment seriously, let me take a step back. We have this agriculture and resource protection zoning district. And now, out of this whole process of, different working groups, we have this recommendation to create a commission to start looking into this question and advising. But in actuality, isn't the Conservation Commission today advising on issues that affect natural resource conservation in that zoning district? And I think the reason that this draft is so focused on farming and agriculture is because that's what's been most contentious in the process, perhaps. So I think that we heard some good public comments about potentially including natural resources more in this language, but I'm confused about how that could create conflict with the Conservation Commission.
What I'm hearing is that you think a goal should be to clearly define scope, and that the scope should avoid unnecessary overlap with other boards, committees, and committees.
That's correct, and we certainly wouldn't want to build overlap and potential conflict into the charter.
Well, I think that's the important part, that if you build in that overlap, you necessitate conflict between different, you create it. And what you will create is you will create different viewpoints being presented to council as well. I think that's important. I would like to include Mr. Engler's recommendation as a goal. Are there other goals that we think any ordinance ought to achieve with regard to defining committees and ordinances within the city?
So I guess I have a question about scope. I'm not familiar with the ordinances for other committees for the city, but this seems really broad, and I wonder if it's meant to be aspirational or whether it's meant to be actually doable. I have a problem creating a committee that has such a broad charge that it can't possibly do all of that. So, yeah, I'm just a little concerned about that. And especially as that interacts with the resources, I think that's something that any committee of the city should consider.
So could I say that we might say that we should pay attention so that the scope should be realistic, given the scope of work should be realistic given the available resources?
Yes.
I apologize. I know that I'm being somewhat nitpicky here, but the feedback I got from the council the last time we reviewed something was that, and I got this from the public as well, that it was appreciated that the board developed specific goals and criteria prior to actually going through and looking at things, and that it aided in transparency. And so that was something that worked last time. It was appreciated by the council, and so that's why I'm sort of doing that this time. Is there anything else that would be general?
I don't know if this counts as being more general, but one of the things that I am reflecting on is that we went from adjudication to no interaction at all with special exceptions, and I'd like to see some kind of compromise where we could have this committee still review and provide feedback on special exceptions, much like, as I mentioned this before, much like the Complete Streets Committee does that for the cities of Auburn and Lewiston.
I'm going to add that in a different section. So you would like us to answer the question in terms of to what level, adjudication is the wrong word, but
Our line of work.
And I'm not suggesting that we move toward adjudication. That was what the issue was or the conflict was when we had our joint meeting with City Council. What I'm saying is that we've gone from that to no participation at all in special exception review. And I think that there are other committees that have a similar model to what I'm suggesting, so it's not out of scope or out of practice for the city to have a committee with that charge. And I think that the intent of this committee was to have more participation in special exception review, and we've moved completely away from it, so I'm proposing a meeting in the middle.
Until there is a special exception, it's kind of a catch-22. I think that's one of the things that we would probably be discussing in terms of possible amendments to the ag and resource protection zoning language. Currently, there really isn't a role either for the planning board or an ag committee to make any determinations on anything. So I think that is kind of one of the things that potentially an ag advisory committee could serve as an advisory board as a peer review for farming projects as they come forward. And there has been discussion of language regarding a special exception, and it may be just premature to get into that kind of language, but I think it might be worthwhile to describe it as an advisory board on issues as they arise. So it may be that the recommendations that the planning board makes now in terms of moving this committee forward may eventually get modified in terms of the final actions of the city council, but at this juncture, what city council is asking us to do is make a recommendation on the text that they've produced before us. So there's a lot happening in regards to this zoning district. I think what may help the planning board is to focus on what you would like to see such a committee perform for the city in regards to this zone. And maybe that will help clarify things. Think about a committee in terms of 1 or 2, 3 hours a month and what kind of outcome you might expect from that kind of committee.
I've got it written down. I think it's something we can still discuss.
Well,
Yes. So,
Getting back-
so that side jumped out. I just want to ask before you begin, is there anything else that we think in general, like just, I think it's okay. I think we can start moving here to like some of the things we think are missing in here or need to be changed. But in terms of like specific goals for any language regarding a committee, any other goals?
well, getting back to what you said and what basically everybody said, they have to be doable. And I see a purpose for this committee, and I think that the work would be very beneficial to us. What I'm wondering is, are we giving them not necessarily too much responsibility, but are we giving them too big of a goal? You know, you look at this and we're saying promote opportunities for farm financing and farming, and then we go over here, you know, we're going to coordinate the activities of local, state, regional. You look at 4, we're going to look at best farming methods and practices. You jump down and we're going to support broad participation. How are we going to give them the ability to do that and still come back to us in a timely manner?
Yeah, I think that speaks to Mr. Duval's point that we need to pay attention to the scope of work, and that needs to be realistic given the resources, yeah.
I mean, it's a laudable goal, don't get me wrong. I would love to have that information available to us, but I'm seeing for us to be able to do that in even a timely manner, we would be, getting back to what I said earlier, we would get the program, we would have to turn around and give it to the agricultural panel for them to get back to us at a later date with their recommendations, and I don't know.
Well, let me propose the following. It sounds like there is nothing else to add to this list in terms of the general goals we think that that any ordinance language should accomplish. So it might be in our best interest, as we've already started moving in this direction, to go through the individual sections and use these goals as sort of a test to say whether or not this language meets those goals. In that discussion, I think it is fair for us to make suggestions similar to Mrs. Boss's in saying when we are looking at the scope, deciding if the scopes that are provided are realistic or not, what changes we think might need to be made to make them realistic, or decide if there are additional items that are missing that could be included realistically, given the resources. I think that begins with going through and determining whether the planning board would like to suggest a specific amount of staff responsibility to the committee. Currently, there's none in the language, and I think our recommendation to either include that or allow it to be omitted will determine how we move forward in defining whether or not the scope outlined is realistic. Yes?
So I think one of the challenges, obviously, with any committee is how are materials brought forward, and what are those agendas? What do those agendas look like? With the planning board, applications come in. Your charge is to review them. You can also initiate topics and issues regarding the comp plan, the zoning ordinance, et cetera. But from a committee's perspective, how do they set their agenda? How do they set up their accomplishments, their goals, their scope of work, given a fairly long and diverse list, all of which is needed? I think that does become the larger question of how are those agendas determined, and what are the expectations in terms of output and outcome?
Well, I was happy to see number 10, adopt bylaws to govern the internal affairs of the committee, including meeting frequency. That is something that should be included in every single committee. The other committees that are similarly described in the ordinance in conjunction with the planning board, out of those, the planning board is the only one that has such an item in the ordinance saying that we must create board policies. So I think that Audrey brings up an important point, but I think number 10 allows that committee to define those things, and perhaps instead of saying bylaws, it ought to say policy. And I know that that's a small word change, but bylaws generally describe specific actions and how actions will be taken, whereas policy can be more broadly defined to include how things are submitted to this committee, how the committee wishes, the committee can decide how things are submitted. Things must be submitted to us on the Wednesday prior to a Monday meeting, for instance. Those are the sort of things that we include in our policies, and those are the sorts of things that help staff to do the wonderful job they do in creating these meetings. But it's because if it hasn't come in at that time, staff doesn't have to put it in our meeting. They're not in a rush. They don't feel they need to do that. The only reason that exists is because we developed our own policies. So I think Audrey brings up an important point, but I think that is actually covered in the ordinance itself. As long as the people that are appointed to this committee recognize that they have the authority to create policies that define those things. Yay, nay? On whether or not we feel that the policies defining how the committee operates, whether or not that can be covered in the requirement that they develop their own policies, or whether or not that policy should be embedded in the ordinance itself. I think that's really the question that, Audrey, am I hearing you wrong, that
Well,
you're really saying that some of that
Yeah.
needs to be clearly defined, and it's either going to be defined in the ordinance or it's going to be defined in a policy manual somewhere, but it's got to be there.
Yeah, and I think what you may be confusing is this is more of a procedural mechanism, the internal affairs, similar to what you received in terms of, voting members and items and just the procedural inner workings of the committee itself. But the actual jurisdiction or tasks that the planning board and the city council is expecting this body to, the role and the function that the city would like them to serve, I think is where we get into a little confusion. Are they going to set their own agenda and their own accomplishments, or is the planning board or the city council going to ask and direct them? Is it going to be a self-generated workload?
Well, yeah, I think that speaks to Mr. Duval's pointing out that this is like incredibly broad. There's some broad scopes here, and same thing Mr. Carey is saying, there's like some really broad scopes, and I think we might handle that as we read through.
Yeah, well, I think an example of what Audrey was just talking about is number 9, the one that immediately precedes this, which is basically anything the city council forwards it has to take.
Yeah, I agree.
Those
Yeah.
are...
Those are the kinds of things I would hope that we would say, like, make a strong case for, need to be eliminated, because that's so broad a scope as to not be useful to that committee. I agree. Well, since we're starting, do we want to do that? Do we want to? I was thinking that we would start by talking about whether or not we think that there should be staff responsibility defined to the committee. But I'm hearing board members really jumping to the scope and the actions that are expected of the committee. And since that's where the board seems to be going, I think that it might be reasonable to start there instead. Under section 2-485.4 powers and duties. Does everyone feel comfortable starting? I say because it appears that's where we're going, and if that's where we're going to keep coming back to, we might as well talk about it first.
Well, I would make 2 points. One is you can move forward with a recommendation on this committee and it with its broad scope, because it would essentially enable this committee to do almost anything under its purview for research recommendations, advice, et cetera. And then at a later date, determine how the workload and its support would be determined. But I think in terms of the creation of the committee, the support is fairly important. How much heft and loft does it have? How much can it actually be expected to produce? So I wouldn't, if you want to go through the entirety of the scope listed and make a determination on appropriateness, it might be an exhausting task.
Oh, I don't think it has to be. I don't think we have to wordsmith. I think what we can do is make a determination as to whether or not we believe it's a reasonable scope. Yes, it's reasonable. No, it is not reasonable. And succinctly explain why we believe that the scope is too large for that specific item. And I don't think that would be onerous. I think it would be onerous if we got to a point where we were wordsmithing each section, each item. And I don't know how the board feels about that with regard to whether or not the board would like to define language for each item, or whether or not individual board members feel that it's okay to say, we think that is appropriate, or no, the council should consider reducing the scope because X, Y, Z. So there are basically 2 options as we go through, and I'm going to let the board, what are people's thoughts on that?
I don't have enough context to know if this is a very long scope compared to other committees. I know we have about 30 committees or boards in this city. Is this significantly longer than others, or where does it fall?
I pulled up the Conservation Commission because that was something you discussed, wanting more information on. And they have a fairly basic purpose to review natural resources and forestry. This is their powers and duties. It is strictly focused on conservation or environmental activity. The longest paragraph is number 4. Otherwise, this list is, annual reports, undertake any other conservation or environmental activity referred by city council, develop a plan for or provide advice to city staff and agencies regarding management of the community forest. It's fairly specific in some cases. Shall assist staff in the preparation of park and trail plans, the identification of new sites to be added to the park system, recommendations on designation of open space area and grant assistance. It is somewhat specific. So in relation, there is a much broader scope for the Ag Committee as proposed.
Yeah, I think the number of items is not necessarily a lot.
No.
It's what's in the items.
It's in the item.
I would feel that that would be more burdensome because you have specific requirements that you're being asked to follow, where these are so broad that I feel that any activities could fit within them. It feels to me like the Conservation Commission scope is much more difficult.
Their scope is not particularly difficult. It's that they have specific actionable steps they're required to undertake in the absence of reasonable staff support. If the Conservation Commission had the city planner, I think these things would be, what they're being asked to do really wouldn't be that difficult. I think what makes it difficult is that we sort of just threw the Conservation Commission in the back room and said, great, here's your charge, go have fun. And we didn't really think about supporting them. I hear you. I think what I'm hearing you say is that these are broad enough that anything they do could possibly fit under them. The problem being that means the board or the council could come and ask them to do anything we think fits underneath those umbrellas, and they'd be compelled to do it.
The planning board's not actually linked anywhere, where it's only city council, am I correct?
On which?
Looking at the numbered, the committee shall, I see, the number 1, recommendations to planning board, but the rest are, the city council can make requests of this body. Not the planning board. I see your point, though, I understand that. I'm less inclined to pare down the scope, because I see Audrey's point about leaving it broad to allow for a wider range of activities and allow for this committee to review its activities after a year or 2 of being in existence and seeing what works and what doesn't work. I don't know that I feel compelled to cut that down at this point.
Yeah, one model is with any committee is to give them their charge and let the members on the committee go through this list and make their own work plan and bring that forward, let planning board and city council know where their efforts are going to be placed and what might they bring before each body. That's one model to pursue.
So like number 7 with the voluntary municipal farm support program, is that something that's already going on and that some other committees handling those applications now?
No, that is a program that 2 other municipalities in the state of Maine have enacted. So the town of Winslow, and I forget the name of the other one that has got...
Monmouth?
Monmouth, yes, correct.
I had a question with that item. The note that I put there was, for what purpose? Who will determine eligibility? Are they determining eligibility, or are they bringing that to the city council?
The voluntary, the role of an ag commission in the voluntary municipal programs is much more of a peer review and making recommendations. So they essentially establish the bona fides, if you will, of the program. So they're acting as an expert intermediary.
I just worry that that as drafted, we are asking them for a lot, and giving them very little resources to do anything. I understand the argument for leaving the charge fairly broad right now. My fear is that if the charge is left broad, that anyone who is allowed, like, because they have to make, for instance, because they're required to make recommendations to the planning board regarding ongoing needs of protecting farms, forestry, businesses, farmland, woodland. That essentially means the planning board could go and say, we want a recommendation on this, we want a recommendation on this, we want a recommendation on this. Like, we could do that to them, every week. Now, would we? I would hope we wouldn't, right? But the reality is that we can, and then the city council can sort of come in here, and there's ones they can do whatever they want. And I could be persuaded to leave these broad, but I think the only way I would be willing to move in that direction is to clearly define a robust set of supports available to this committee. And as I'm I'm thinking out loud, and I'm sure what I'm about to say will be incredibly controversial, but I'm thinking about out loud, and I'm thinking that the two boards and committees, of the boards and committees that have the access to the most resources, obviously the city council has access to the most resources. I think Complete Streets generally has access to a fair amount of municipal resources. I think the planning board has, in terms of different committees, a lot of access to municipal resources. I don't think committees like, for instance, the Conservation Commission is afforded much access to municipal resources. To that end, and because this is a new committee, and because we've already talked about the idea of realizing that there is a particular trial period in which things will need to be ironed out, would it be okay to create this committee as a subcommittee of the planning board with a sunset clause, removing it from a subcommittee, say, in a 3 or 4 year basis? Possibly that it be a joint subcommittee between planning board and conservation commission. So that way the two senior boards or committees can help aid the Ag Committee, but with a sunset clause such that it is not meant to be it's not meant to be a subcommittee of another committee within the city forever, that it's really coming out of an effort to help provide resources and support to this committee within the first 3 years.
I think that if we take a step back and look broadly at the amount of city staff time and resources that have gone into the ag conversations more broadly, I think it would make more sense to just have this committee be independent and be given staff time to it. I think that if you look at the overall net gain or net loss of staff time and resources, it would be pretty minimal.
I think it'll be a lot of staff time because they're starting out. I think if we're not going to, I think no matter what, there needs to be a recommendation coming out of the board that there needs to be specific staff with specific responsibilities assigned within this ordinance. It's like not enough to just say, it's not just enough to say, well, yeah, staff will definitely support them. I think that's.
How would you propose specifically to word, to state that?
Well, I think that we'd have to look to the ordinance that governs the planning board, actually, in order to determine some of the ways that that's already included in our municipal ordinances. And when we look at the planning board ordinance, you find that the director of planning or or their designee attends meetings and keeps minutes and is the person that keeps those minutes and is responsible for keeping those minutes and preparing the agenda, preparing the reports for meetings. I can think of the Conservation Commission right now, and Commissioner Tate essentially develops agendas, has to take the meeting minutes, develop the meeting minutes, curate the meeting minutes, curate the tapes, run the tape recorder, while simultaneously acting as chair of the commission. I think that and we've already seen that the scope of their work, they might have a lot of items, but it's very specific what they can be asked to do. I think that as chairperson, I can tell you it is incredibly helpful to be able to meet with Audrey and Megan and occasionally Eric and get their perspective and get their expertise, get their understanding in with regard to zoning. They are an asset that I don't think the planning board could go without. As a chairperson, because I meet regularly with them, I can tell you there's no way we'd be able to do this without them. There's no way we could function under the same structure that the Conservation Commission functions under. I mean, further, after we're done this, I think we recommend that they go and do that with the Conservation Commission as well, but, you know. I've monopolized a lot of time on this topic, so I will sit back and allow others to.
So I think another aspect to this for me is guidance. So if you have, this goes to the point you made earlier, Audrey, about who sets the agenda. And I think that's important when you have I could leave the charge this broad, but if you have a charge this broad, then somewhere this group will need to get guidance in order to do anything. Because if you look at all this, you could just choose one and do it, but it's entirely up to your current leader. And if 2 years later you have another leader, that person sets the agenda and then suddenly you're going in an entirely different direction, and that's completely within the charge. So the Conservation Committee works because it's got a very narrow scope, specific items, and so that is direction. This charge can work as long as there's some system of directing the work.
Would it behoove us to identify what in the charges that we're giving them could be done by city staff? Because looking through these, there are certain things that city staff could help them with. But there are other things that have nothing to do with city staff. You have items in here that would go to regional, the USDA, the State Agricultural Committee. I mean, there's not going to be anything we can do as far as allocating time for them to meet with them. I think we need to identify what the city staff is capable of helping them with in the shall list, and maybe address just what we can control. We can't control what the state does. We can't control what regional does, county does. We can only control, and I say control, I don't mean to use that term in a negative manner, but direct staff to help them with the items that they can help them with.
There are a couple of options. One is to essentially have the planning board and/or the city council annually determine a work program, or in collaboration with the ag committee, maybe the ag committee put forward their annual scope of work, and the planning board and city council act to review and recommend or contribute to that. That's one mechanism. The second item regarding staff, I think something like that is easily added. I've just reviewed the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission, and the Conservation Commission's charter. They essentially establish one ex officio member of the board, the manager, city manager, their designee, which is essentially a staff person. And in the case of the planning board, the planning director essentially in the same manner establishes a designee. So to serve certain functions as Evan indicated. So I think you could easily make a recommendation on this committee with adding those kinds of provisions, an annual work program and support staff and, other kinds of add-ons without getting into manipulating or editing this current version. It would be easy enough to add staffing under officers, meetings, support, and records. It would be easy enough to add or amend a paragraph, let's say in the first section regarding the planning board and city council, and consult with the conservation commission regarding the ongoing needs. Maybe that's an ongoing needs and annual work program. Those kinds of things might be easily added. That gives much more of a dynamic, integrated work program for all the bodies in regards to their mission and their tasks and the expectations of what they're doing. As we witnessed with the Conservation Commission, there are often these overlapping issues and topics that involve everybody, and the more we can provide that integration of these different bodies, I think it could work a lot more synergistically for everybody, staying on the same page in terms of expectations and needs.
We gotta talk.
I like the proposal about having a work plan, annual work plan. I think that's a good mechanism for not only staying on task, but also for evaluating impact. I think that would be great for a lot of other groups. So I like that as a proposal.
I concur.
I would ask that we make it I would think a quarterly work plan might be more beneficial, particularly as the committee is starting out. They may not have the institutional memory to effectively develop an annual work plan, which means that they might either put too much on their annual work plan or perhaps leave themselves with voids. If we utilize a quarterly work plan, it allows them to sort of check and adjust throughout the year. And as the committee develops, it also doesn't preclude that something that was on the first quarter work plan doesn't continue into the second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter, and so on.
Well, and maybe what you can do essentially as a planning board is determine what would you ask of this committee when it's formed. Let's say the committee is up and running. What would you like them to do? What would you, in terms of consulting with them, what would you want to know? What would you want them to do to help support your work? I mean, there's probably a list of like, I don't know, 2 to 10 items.
Yeah, I can think of several, but I've spoken a lot, so.
Well, and I don't think we don't have to identify specific things right now. I think we have to unless I'm wrong, what we're talking about is whether or not we want to insert some language about staff and work plan oversight into this. And I'm in favor of doing both of those things.
I think there's consensus around that. Why don't we identify those items in which we believe we can insert.
Are we proposing to insert them into specific powers and duties or into a section above that just says?
You can make an overall recommendation in regards to the draft as it stands in a cover memo. Essentially, it'd be a letter from the planning board with your overall recommendations in support of the committee language with the addition that these 2 or 3 items be addressed and leave it to them, or make a specific suggestion about where and how you would like that to be, or you can wordsmith it. Those are the 3 options. A general letter of recommendation, wordsmithing, or
So the board remembers our last recommendation to the council was essentially was similar to the first option that Audrey described, in that we broke it into sections and made broad recommendations with regard to whether or not we thought those sections met specific goals. And we left it at that. We gave very little direction on how we felt the council should proceed. So that's something we've done most recently. I'm hearing lots of consensus. I'm also hearing some points of contention. And I think that with regard to developing a recommendation that all of us are willing to own, that might be a more appropriate option. I think that there's a lot of consensus, but there's enough non-consensus as to preclude option 3, wordsmithing. I don't think there's enough consensus among the board tonight to be able to develop specific language. But I do think that we could come to consensus with regard to specific recommendations, and where where those changes could be addressed in the document itself. I think that's something that we can come to as I'm listening to everyone speak. Would the board like to choose a different option?
Sort of leading towards Mr. Duval's recommendation that we add the two things in that set them up to have a quarterly review of their work assignments, and forgive me, I forgot the other part of it. Senility is setting in early.
It was something about staffing.
Mr. Sear, aren't you suggesting that you're suggesting that there's two options for how we approach this task right now as a board? One is to go through and actually wordsmith the document, and another is to just write a memo with broader recommendations. Is that correct or incorrect?
Yeah, and then there's some form of in between. For instance, we could, if we all have consensus that on the quarterly issue, we could wordsmith and add that item in where we believe it should be in, and where we feel that we don't have enough consensus to wordsmith, we could broader recommendations. So there's also sort of a hybrid as well.
Well, personally, I think it'd be easier to do some bullets and not parse words right now. So I say we move towards that. So
What was that?
Listening to
Nothing
him.
important.
Listening to him.
I think we're all getting a little goofy, but that's okay.
Okay, so I think that quarterly work plans make a lot of sense, especially getting out of the gate over the next year 1 to 2, of the existence.
I completely agree. I wonder, do we want to specify that in a document? So if they're not necessary in 5 years and they're written into the description of the ordinance that creates the committee, then
They'll be able to amend it, suggest amendments along the way.
okay.
It may be easier to make an overall recommendation on, if you agree in principle, in general, with everything that is written in this document, in general, the scope of work, the membership, the qualifications, if those things are of agreement to the planning board, it may be easier to do a summary memo in terms of your additions and concerns.
Well, we haven't even touched the front stuff. We just jumped to this stuff. I got like a whole list of things for like who's allowed to be on this, and I think it's ridiculous that we let people that aren't from Auburn be on this first of all. I think that's a bad idea. But
So what was was there a determination, having experts from out of the area, that because they may be experts and they don't live here, or because they may own businesses here but not necessarily live here, or?
It says, "All members of the committee shall be selected upon the basis of their active involvement, skill, or expertise in agriculture, forestry, wildlife protection, or preservation, etc." So all of the members, including those non-residents, have to have some kind of skill set that would be relatable.
On the face of it, I think that sounds really nice. The Auburn Planning Board would not exist if that was required of us. And I think we do a bang-up job, so. I think we do a bang-up job when it comes to site plan review and understanding things.
If the commission, I mean, maybe this is part of it. I mean, if the city council is, at this point in the text, being given the opportunity to appoint these members, there is no specific diversity in terms of representation, simply that they meet these criteria. So it may be that you want specific experts over specific things that aren't currently here and available. So
I understand the argument. I guess I actually liked the qualifications in the draft that was provided by Chris Carson. All members of the commission shall be selected upon the basis of their knowledge of or interest in agriculture, forestry, wildlife. I think if we change the qualifications that are provided from active involvement to knowledge of or interest, I think that would be a great qualification, but I think it would be like saying you can only have a planning board if you have city planners, you know, and I feel like that's A, going to be difficult to find. I think it will promote a lack of diverse involvement of community members, because you've created a smaller pool to draw from when you say, like, they have to be actively involved. So I think it's good. I think that I would hope that preference would be given to people that have active understanding and knowledge. But at the same time, I don't think it's requisite, nor is it necessarily healthy for the commission to be sort of pigeonholed that way.
I mean, the idea is that you're going to have people who have a real understanding of agriculture so that they can respond to the city's needs in terms of the ag zone and other areas of the community. And it also says very clearly that, the members are selected based on all these different qualifications or exposure or interest in related fields. So I find that it's quite broad. I don't think it's pigeonholing people. It's not just a community of farmers in the ag zone. But I would feel uncomfortable loosening that any further because the intention is to be a committee that is providing more expert experience and perspective on agriculture.
But it says active involvement. That's the only quality. They have to be actively involved. On their active involvement, skill, or expertise.
So, for example, I work in public health. I sit on the Good Food Council. That could be broad enough or a related enough field for me to be seated on the ag committee.
It could be.
Right. So that's what I'm saying, is I'm not a farmer and I don't own ag zone land. So that feels to me like it's broad enough that there are lots of other related fields that could be seated on the committee.
So why not use... where is it? Why not use knowledge? Why not use active involvement, interest? Why not include interest? I think that there are individuals. I look at the audience and I see individuals who are not necessarily professional experts in conservation or land conservation or water quality, but they have incredible interest, and they have enriched our process intensely because of their interest. And I think that if that someone can have an active interest in something and still have something meaningful to provide, I don't think we have to qualify it as they have to be actively involved or have an expertise or a skill. I think having an interest is also enough. An active interest should also be enough to qualify someone for membership on this committee.
Well, then I think what you do is you get into who is going to make the determination on the membership of the committee.
Two counselors that sit on a
Appointment committee.
an appointment committee.
Yeah.
And it will be their determination as to whether or not you're actively involved.
Is that the agreement? I mean, and that doesn't matter how, and that's part of the committee qualifications and how members are appointed. You could make a decision that the planning board shall appoint 3 members, the city council shall appoint 3 members, and the conservation commission shall appoint 3 members. You can make any recommendation regarding the formation of this committee that you want.
Hearing you explain it that way, I think adding or somehow having interest in there rather than expertise does give you, does open it up. And why is these, if we can open up that much, they all should be Auburn residents. Why do we got 1/3 of them don't even have to be a resident of Auburn? And this, looking out for Auburn's best interest? My thoughts.
Well, with regard to the non-residents, so the board could be 6 residents and 3 non-residents. But because it is required that 2/3 of the board be residents, a single resident could resign, and we know this happens because this happened on the planning board, okay? And it's not like an uncommon thing. Life happens. People find that they need, they have other priorities. So that one residence will necessitate that one non-resident be removed. So, in my opinion, it should be only Auburn residents. But if you're going to have non-residents, there better be a mechanism described and metrics for choosing who that non-resident is that gets booted off. Like that was a big gap. That was a huge gaping hole for me. I saw that and I said, well, I think they should all be residents, but if that's not the way it goes, then there needs to be consideration given to what does happen when a resident member leaves that committee.
So why would that resident member not be filled, that seat be filled by another resident? I don't understand what you're saying, that a non-resident would have to be removed? Should a resident member?
Unless the resident spot is filled in between meetings.
Is your issue about quorum? I just don't understand what your point is.
It's
Sorry.
just that the rule is written as a ratio that it must be 2/3
So
satisfied.
you prefer to see 6 and 3 as opposed to 2/3?
No. 6 and 3 is 2/3.
I'm trying to get at what your proposal is. Sorry, I'm not following.
That could fix one element of what Mr. Sears is talking about, I think.
Yeah.
Because you would not need that other person to resign in that instance if it said 6 and 3.
That is an option, yeah.
No more than 3.
You could say no
or
more
none
than
at
3.
all.
That would be my preference.
But I'm personally, I actually am also confused why we're inviting non-residents onto the commission. Is there any other board or commission that invites non-residents?
Good question. Let me see if there's anything on Conservation Commission. 7 members appointed by City Council who shall be residents of the city. Let's see if the complete streets, the
And if we
complete
allow
streets
somebody
is
to-
probably one in which.
Is this something you discussed at the meeting?
No, it didn't come up in the context of that conversation. So I don't actually
And
know
if
the
we have
origins of it.
interest along with expertise as qualifications, interest and/or expertise.
So in this case,
it allows us to,
like the Complete Streets Committee, 9 members, 4 residents of the city of Auburn, 4 residents of the city of Lewiston, and 1 representative of an organization directly involved in the issues of public health and wellness. A city councilor may be appointed as a resident. So
they're also a joint committee, right? So like,
Yes. And state members often attend from,
Could we require the non-residents to have expertise rather than just interest?
we could, I guess.
that would be the whole point, right? You know.
Well,
That's the scenario that I actually fear, that we get 3 rock star experts, in air quotes, who are not residents of Auburn on this committee, and then they're just with, normal folks like us. I don't know. It seems a little bit odd, and I'm not sure if whoever drafted this language had a particular archetype of who this expert would be, this expert non-resident. But I'm having trouble thinking of any type of expert non-resident that I think would really benefit the work of this committee.
I'm having a hard time just with the non-resident part.
So I would suggest changing it to residents only.
I'll agree.
I'd agree.
how are we feeling as we?
I could agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's all right. I think it's a little bit disappointing that people are not interested in having experts be a part of the process, since we have intentionally brought those experts into our conversations about the Ag Zone ordinance change. But if there's a mechanism to ensure that their voices are included as part of the process and don't have to sit on the committee, then I'd be okay with that. But it feels a little bit counter-purpose to not include expert voices in deliberations about agricultural land in our community.
What are we talking about? You're going to be bringing, as part of the agriculture, I say you, as part of the agriculture, you're going to be conversing with experts in the field. And I'm going to look out in the office and I see Mr. Sylvester sitting there, and I would consider him an expert in forestry because he's been a forester his entire life. I'd look back in the back there with Ms. Melgrano, and she's a farmer, so could she be an expert? Well, she's a farmer. I mean, successful, unsuccessful, whatever. That could be an expert. So, I mean, it depends on what kind of expert you're looking for. If you're going to look for somebody outside of our area, well, then I would imagine we'd be going to the state or to, the federal government to find an expert that could give us their expert opinion. But as far as experts in the city, we would be looking for people that do that for a living, that are doing it for a living. That would be expert, enough for at least my standpoint.
I would argue that it doesn't preclude experts either. We invited the state. We invited 2 folks from the state, of forestry and agriculture, right, to come down and present to us. They didn't necessarily need to be members of the board for us to receive their input. In fact, it was probably more beneficial to have them as a third party not interested in the outcome of our decisions in order to provide pure information that is not tied to a board agenda. To me, I think that's more powerful to have outside experts coming in that are not beholden to us.
And I think that they're going to be, as part of the committee shalls, they'll be talking with those people anyway. You're talking about experts in farming and farm financing and crops and things like that. You're going to be addressing experts in those fields.
Right, you can be consulting with experts. They don't have to be on the committee.
Right.
I apologize. We digressed. We sort of stopped our. Was there anything else that you would like to add?
On which point, sorry?
Specifically the resident.
I don't know that there's language in here that specifically says that we're engaging actively with experts. It'd be nice to see that if we're not going to have non-residents on there. I'm fine with taking out reference to non-residents, but just really acknowledging that we did bring in a lot of outside people to help or engage with them in our conversations, that there were more that we could have brought in and didn't. So just acknowledging that we need to have expert opinion. But I'm okay with removing non-residents.
Experts don't need a PhD.
And I want to clarify that I'm not saying that local landowners or local farmers or local property owners are not experts. I think that would be ridiculous to state they are the expert, particularly when we're talking about our local land. I'm just saying that when we're talking about statewide trends and other kind of issues that impact our local context, it's really important that we're connecting to those folks too.
Well, to go back to a point that Mr. Sear had made, the language from the draft that had been shared by Chris Carson, that refers to knowledge of or interest in, and then the language in the draft we're considering refers to land ownership or active engagement, right, which are two different forms of interest. So actually, our current language has taken out that concept of knowledge of, which is expertise, I would say. So perhaps we can re-inject knowledge and expertise in the current language, but requiring residency for all 9 members.
And I apologize, Mr. Duval has not had a chance to express his opinion. I want to make sure that he has the ability to do so if he'd like.
Yeah, so I'm, residency or not, I'm not worried about that, but I do agree with Mrs. Boss about the need to engage experts, and perhaps those are things that could be put into the powers and duties specifically or someplace within the document that seeking expertise is important.
And I would expect that the committee at will would engage experts all the time. Doesn't mean they're a member of the committee. It doesn't mean they're or a resident of Auburn.
Yep. I was just going to say, number 3 sort of does that. Seek to coordinate activities in local, state, and regional organizations of similar purpose and collaborate to assist with education of the community regarding food systems and agriculture and forestry. So we could just add maybe a word in there saying that, I hate telling another committee what they have to do, but if you put it in there that they could bring that in, if they, from a standpoint, just like we have people come in here, the leads on the developments and stuff, we have them come in so we can pick their brains about the certain things. So I would say adding something maybe to that would allow you guys to be, or I'm going to keep saying you guys, it's not, wherever the committee is, that they be able to address that and be able to go out and solicit expert information regarding whatever field it happens to be in. It's not going to be just in agriculture. We talk about financing and things like that. So there's going to be a great deal of experts out there that we're going to be able to tap to answer questions in regards to this.
May I take a moment while you're still in the middle of deliberations to bring your attention to the hour? We're approaching the 9 o'clock hour. We still have a couple of other items that we need to accomplish for the evening. It does not feel necessarily like we're going to reach a satisfactory, unified recommendation tonight on this matter, that we may need to pick this up and continue it. As just a suggestion so we can complete the agenda items. It sounds like there's a lot of food for thought, that you all may want to massage this and come back with more solidified recommendations at a future date.
Table it.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. Thank you. Is there a motion to table?
I make a motion to table this to the next set board.
Well, I'll give the motion to my right, but
okay.
Matt got it out before you did. Wait.
So you had suggested, Evan, at the beginning of the meeting that we would have another meeting in the short term. Is that planned still?
Yes.
Could this be brought up at that point?
Yeah, this would be.
Because I would hate to see this pushed off for another month.
No, this would have to come up at a special meeting.
Okay.
We don't have time to keep pushing it out. So a motion to table
Second.
to a date uncertain. We want to say to a date uncertain because that means we can. Second.
To be determined.
Discussion? All those in favor? Okay. All right. I will bring up the special meeting under miscellaneous B. Is it corresponds with a joint meeting with the city council as well, so. The next item on the agenda is 7 old business, a minor revision to conditions of approval at 185 Summer Street subdivision, decision of September 10th, 2009, planning board findings.
Is that the yellow highlight?
Yes.
So we created a draft findings of fact for this proposal. You'll note it goes through the project description, planning board review process, the documents that were considered as part of the review, the review standards and waivers that were granted, the green space waiver. And then the reason that it's before you tonight, aside from potential signatures, is there were 8 conditions that were placed on the approval, and we want to make sure that the way that the conditions are written really capture what the planning board intended with those conditions. One issue that we ran into is that one of the conditions was to reduce the 100-foot curb cut down to a 50-foot curb cut on Summer Street and achieve the green space by using the extra area on the side of that reduction in curb cut. It turns out the curb cut was actually only 50 feet to begin with. So we're recommending that it be reduced to 20 feet, which is the requirement in the ordinance, and then have the remaining impervious area on either sides designated as green space. So the condition's been updated to reflect that, and it's highlighted in the findings of fact, but just want to clarify that with the planning board and make sure that that's okay. And we've discussed this with the applicant as well, so they understand. So.
Okay.
That's fine.
I had a question about number 4. It says to me the 20% green space variance granted. Is that the percentage we had used?
Yes.
20%?
Yep.
If the variance is 20%, they are required to provide 30% of the 50%.
Okay, it's variance to, okay, that's what I was saying. It's like, I know it was 30% we had discussed, so it's a variance of 20%.
It's varying
Okay,
the requirements by 20%.
I just wanted to clarify that, because I thought that was, 10%'s a lot. All right, so we would require a motion to amend these findings of fact.
So moved.
Seconded.
To be amended to the draft dated, the draft proposed on today's date?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a motion, is there a second? Discussion? All those in favor? Okay, great. Public comment. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak at this time?
Bill Sylvester, 1128 Riverside Drive. I want to say that I saw part of that program last night with the city manager. That seemed to be a real good start to an end to this agony. And the non-resident thing, I don't think that's a problem. If we were all residents, I think that was people just trying to, that came out in both committees, and we agonized with it. I think we said, well, let's have non-residents, but don't eliminate anybody from outside. You've mentioned Stephanie Gilbert. Yes, get her back. And you mentioned last time about a electrical thing. You had to study it. Well, everybody has to study stuff. Just because you're an electrical engineer doesn't mean you don't study some new thing. Yes, you get people from even Turner down into Auburn to help you with these things. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to the board at this time?
I have a question. If you receive the...
Would you mind? Yeah, I apologize.
You actually get to go in the center instead of having...
I know, you don't have to go, off on the side there, yeah.
Did you guys receive the letter or recommendation or statement from the Conservation Commission regarding the formation of the Ag Commission? I didn't see it in the packet, but I could have missed it.
Is this a recent recommendation?
We discussed it at the last Conservation Commission meeting.
I have not received it.
Okay.
No.
I guess that's all I have.
Can you provide it?
I don't have it. No, I haven't seen it.
I will reach out.
Our chair was going to be
Was
formulating that.
it voted on? Is it formally voted on?
I
do you know?
believe so. I honestly don't fully recall.
I will reach
I
out to
believe
Jordan and ask
it was.
what
Yeah, check with her.
information she's able to provide and ask her if she feels comfortable providing at least a draft if it wasn't
Yep.
officially voted on.
Nobody knew this was happening tonight, so that's why nobody's here. You said, I hope this means the lack of public means that we trust. It doesn't mean we do or don't. It means nobody knew. Again, nobody knew. So we're not here, so no one's here. Yes, please do check with her on that. I don't know. I don't want to speak in error. I know we discussed it at the last Conservation Commission meeting. I think, in terms of the formation of the group, the members of the group, 3 people, why are we giving away fully 1/3 of an Auburn commission to non-residents? Fully 1/3. And I don't believe there is another committee within the city that gives away fully 1/3 of their committee to non-residents. We are Auburn. We are Auburn. I fully agree with bringing in consultants, experts from other areas who have expertise. That's why we bring them in. That's why we have brought them into all of these meetings over the state folks and everything. I fully support that. We desperately need that. But I think as our commission in Auburn, it's Auburn. We're Auburn. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there, yes.
So, I'm Jan Phillips again. You may not have many people here, but you get a lot from the people who are here. I want to echo Audrey's suggestion in passing that anything you can do to strengthen the connection as you move forward on this committee and the language around creating it, anything you can do to strengthen the linkage between the Ag Committee and the Conservation Commission, I think is all to the good. And I think that is a piece that could be added in that if you do a cover memo, because looking at the language around the Conservation Commission charge and duties and looking at this, I don't think it's clear who does what. And so I think that's a place where you can really do some cleanup work. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Thank you. Elfrida Fournier, 33 Cherryvale Circle. I just wanted to unscramble a little bit of confusion. When I came into the meeting, I was a little confused when we got to the component having to do with the makeup of the ag zone. On the document, it stated that 2 councils were on there in terms of writing it, Holly Lasagna and David Young. And the manager, Peter Creighton, was also on there. I hope that you are not under the assumption that all of us counselors have seen this document, because I didn't take a look at the agenda before I got here. Had I looked at it, I would have seen that document there. So it has not come before the board first, before the council first. So I don't know if that's what you're thinking, that we've all seen it. No? Okay. I just wanted to make sure, make sure that that's clear. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Seeing no more interest, I'll close the public comment section of the meeting. Under miscellaneous, I will take miscellaneous as an entire item, and since we are beginning at 4 of 9, we will complete this entire item. Miscellaneous A, performance standards for community solar development projects in the industrial district.
So we're continuing to receive inquiries from potential developers interested in commercial solar developments in both the industrial and the agricultural zones. We started this discussion very briefly with the planning board back in September, and I think the board seemed to be in favor of coming up with standards at least for the industrial district, but some further consideration was needed on the agricultural zone given everything that's happening with the agricultural zone. We also brought this before the city council at the September meeting, and we had a few questions from them that we bulleted out in the staff report. They asked that we move forward on discussing setbacks and performance standards for the industrial district with the planning board at this meeting. And as a reminder, commercial solar developments are technically allowed in the industrial district right now as an electric generating plant. We just don't have any performance standards in place to regulate them. So your staff report does provide some sample performance standards for commercial solar developments that we pulled from some other communities. And we would like to use this meeting as an opportunity to get an idea from the board on the types of performance standards that you would like to see in the industrial district so that we can come back before you in November with a draft ordinance. So any thoughts that you have on the sample performance standards in the memo would be really appreciated so we can get some guidance for a draft ordinance.
Just as a final clarifying item, we have at least four pending projects that are going through state review. As you may or may not know, there are state credits and federal credits that are going to expire at the beginning of next year. One project we've received a schematic for is around 36,000 panels in this area. We have other projects, 2 other projects in the industrial park area, as well as a possibility of a project over our landfill facility. So these are not small projects. 36,000 panels is not small. So that's it's a permitted use, but because of its scale and size, right now, we don't have anything within the special exceptions or any other thing that would say it needs to come before planning board. Clearly, this is one item that should. So it would be helpful if we can adopt standards in a timely fashion.
As I reviewed these, I did like the idea of identifying different sizes, medium scale, large scale, the concept of dual use. I thought it was smart to tie standards to those, to break those out. I honestly thought this was well thought out. And as I read through it, nothing really jumped out at me that said, okay, this is unacceptable. There are a few things that jumped out at me that I felt were non-negotiable. Like, as we move forward, we must have abandonment standards. Like, I saw that and I said, yes, absolutely. These things have they have an expected life, and I don't want a developer just walking away from a barren solar farm that cannot produce power anymore and leaving someone else with the bill or sticking us with the cleanup. Concepts of solar access I thought were important. I don't know if we need to, with the dual use systems, I thought that was kind of cool what they talked about in Portland. I don't know if that's something that we would even be allowing because our industrial zones don't necessarily, we're not looking at the parking space that you would have, say, in business, but that might be something that we might want to look at when we look at general business. But besides that, I was incredibly happy with what staff reported. I thought it was thorough enough to move forward and not move forward in small increments, but I felt confident that some full-blown standards could be drafted based on what you did. That was my opinion.
The bullet item I circled also was the abandonment to deal def specifically and/or decommissioning.
All right. So with that, I think we can move forward with a draft for your review. All right.
The next item is the Bates College Agriculture Survey and Special Joint Meetings with the City Council. We have been invited to a joint workshop of the City Council on the 21st to specifically discuss the wording of the zoning amendments. I don't know if people have been following the meetings. They've been somewhat disjointed, let's say, with a moderate lack of clarity. It will be nice. The idea is there's some consensus, but there's also lots of disagreement. And we have been invited, and the board can certainly choose to go to discuss the item. I would put forth the following suggestion, that we have a special meeting next week to discuss at least two things that seemed to represent some consensus on the City Council, that we develop a clear message around those two items, and if we decide at the end of Thursday's meeting that we feel comfortable having a joint meeting to discuss those items on Monday, certainly we contact Peter and ask to get on the agenda. If we don't feel like we have an amount of clarity that allows us to have a meaningful discussion, that we respectfully ask the council to be provided more time to come up with meaningful recommendations. I think it's important that we not rush for the sake of rushing. I think it's important that we not drag our feet. But I think it's important that if we have a discussion with the council, it be a meaningful one. My worry is that we would show up with 9 different opinions and without a clear set of consensus or talking points. To that end, the two areas, and I had the opportunity to speak to Peter Crichton before the meeting. I ran into him in the parking garage. The two areas that seem to represent the most consensus are, number one, the concept that an income requirement is a reasonable option for defining who can and cannot build residence accessory to farming. There is no consensus on what the income should be, but there seems to be general consensus that that is a reasonable approach. So that is one topic we could discuss. Audrey and Peter said he could get us all of the ideas that have been put forth. We can look at them, vet them, discuss what sorts of merits they have, so that we would be prepared to discuss that with council. The other thing that there seems to be general consensus among the council with is that lots smaller than 10 acres but larger than 3 acres might possibly be available for development of farms based on a variance system that would operate through special exception. That is clearly in our wheelhouse, and I think it would be in our best interest to discuss that before meeting with the council.
And would that include the building of a residence on that lot?
Yeah, so that's why we want to talk about it first before we walk in there,
Well,
right?
both of them have to go together. There's no getting away from it, so.
Yeah,
Next Thursday, are you proposing?
well, okay, so here's the question. When can we meet? I can only meet next Thursday or Friday.
Can I just ask a clarifying question before we get into scheduling? Is it, I can hear you muttering. Were we asked by city council to to respond to specific items, or are we coming up with what we think is helpful to their process?
City Council gave us no direction.
So how can we be best helpful to their, I mean, we're just kind of saying that these are the things where they have consensus. Do we want to wait until the dust settles a little more, or, I don't know, Brian, what do you think? I just don't know if adding us in at this juncture is helpful or not, but I'm open to other people's thoughts.
I would wait.
Brian attends the meetings. He's
I-
perspective.
In all honesty, I thought the wheels sort of came off last night. I thought that they had been moving in a general direction, and it devolved very quickly last night. And we got off on certain tangents that we probably, or they got, let me rephrase it, they got off on certain tangents that they shouldn't have, and sort of got away from what we had originally come in to discuss. And so, I mean, we can address these, and those two items did come up last night, but I will just tell you that there are a multitude of other things that are floating around underneath that could very well undermine what we put forth as suggestions.
I guess I think it is. If the board does not want to do this next week, that's fine. I will say it is very clear that the writing is on the wall that they are going to kick this back to us. And it's going to be in our best interest to start discussing these items sooner than later, even if we're not discussing them for the sake of helping the board currently in their decisions. More than one counselor and one quite forcefully and regularly alluded to the idea that two things needed to happen. The Ag Commission needed to develop language, and the Planning Board needed to develop language. And while we certainly can wait for them to formally ask us, and I will understand if board members don't want to meet next week in order to discuss specific items, it will be in our best interest to start defining what we think about the topics that keep coming up over and over again, because it's come to us and there's not much we can do about it.
I would agree with that, and I don't have any problem with meeting next week. As you know, I have no life, so next week would be just fine. And I think that we do need to narrow down our topics to exactly what we think should be the requirement. I know that we had originally gone like with the income requirement. We had originally said the IRS, and then somebody said the states would. I think we need to nail down exactly what we think would be the best in at least these two, and maybe possibly maybe another topic or two that might be in there.
May I suggest that staff has put forward a draft recommendation that we can tie that with the Ag Committee language as a possible discussion item. We have worked pretty hard on trying to knock some boundaries on this language, and I think we came up with a reasonable solution, but there are still some quirks to work out. So we would not want to proceed wholeheartedly with these draft recommendations while there are still some big loopholes that need to be ironed out.
Yeah, and it became clear after the staff presentation that one of the things counselors are going to be acutely aware of is findings of fact and justifications for why we are choosing things. For instance, that was a major bone of contention with one of the items in the staff recommendation as to why it was chosen. And that discussion just blew up because there was not a readily available, discreetly defined mechanism for having made that decision and findings of fact. So perhaps instead of discussing two specific items, we can begin by developing, reviewing the staff report and developing our general opinions on things like income. I think 10 acres for lot size is a general consensus. I think there's a general consensus that there has to be a decision made about smaller lots. So maybe we don't discuss the concept of variances as was proposed by the council, but we discuss what we think is most appropriate to do with smaller lots. And if that happens to be variance, we can discuss that. If it's something, a different mechanism, we can discuss something else. The question is the date.
For me, next week on the 17th, 18th, I am booked.
What times?
Huh?
Is there a time in the afternoon that you could, in the evening, I would say?
I'm booked. 17th, 18th, 19th, I'm booked.
Available 17th, not 18th.
I'm not available next week.
17th, not 18th.
The week,
17th or 18th.
The only thing that I'm booked for is the 15th, other than that.
Katie?
Are we talking about afternoon hours or
No,
evening
we'd be
hours?
talking about a normal meeting start, 6 o'clock.
I could do 17th or 18th.
Sounds like not everyone can be here.
It would be a workshop for public noticing purposes. There would be no specific public hearing
Yeah.
or action in that sense because we are short notice time, but
It sounds like not everyone can be there, but most people can be there on the 17th. So I will call a special meeting of the board on October 17th, 2019 to begin at 6 o'clock to discuss proposed amendments to the ag zone. In
So just so
addition-
we're clear, I want to be clear on this because of the noticing, whether or not decisions are made.
I think we will call it a workshop.
It does need to be a workshop, and so, voting and making those kinds
Now,
of.
I do have another question, though. We have tabled an item that is part of a hearing.
Yes, the committee.
Public notice has been given.
Yes.
We can take that off the table at any time because public notice has been given. We can choose to
Continue that item.
continue this topic on Thursday.
Yes, technically, we can, yeah.
I think it's in our best interest to devote some time on Thursday to this as well, so I will add a continued discussion of public hearing item number 6 from today's agenda. What do you think?
Did you say 6 o'clock?
Yes, 6.
I'm just trying to
Yep.
put it in the calendar.
You sure you couldn't say 5?
Yeah, does 5:30 work?
Well, that's a good question. Does 6 work
Earlier is better.
5:30?
Earlier is better
We're
for
doing
us.
the special style.
I got
You
no problem
expect us
with
to be
changing
there, in other words.
Right.
All right, we'll change it to 5:30. Do we think we will probably end up being in the community room, or will we be here?
Don't know yet.
Okay. Location to be determined, either city council chambers or community room.
It is 5:30.
5:30.
If you individually or collectively want to send me your topics of discussion to make sure that we aren't, that we're staying on topic, to make it an efficient meeting, that would be helpful.
In addition, under item B, the Bates College Agriculture Survey and Special Joy. So, there are going to be there are 2 workshops on the 21st. One of the workshops has been called by Councilor Gary and Councilor Lasagna to review the survey that was developed by Professor Ains, and all members of the board have been invited by the council if they so choose to attend to view that. So if that's something that you're interested in checking out, that is on the 21st of October. I don't know when that workshop will be in the agenda, so you'll need to check the agenda, and that agenda is usually available by Friday, and that will tell you roughly what time they plan on doing that. Questions about miscellaneous B? I think upcoming items for November would be next.
Let's just say it's another full agenda.
It has been. I don't know what's.
Yeah, we're going to have a couple more projects. We may have a revisitation of the Broad Street project. We will have a multifamily residential project proposed for North River Road. There'll be some other items as well as potentially draft solar ordinance. It's going to be another full agenda.
Are there other items for discussion from you? Megan? No? Is there any item for discussion from any members of the board, things they'd like to share?
I will not be here at the November meeting. I have a yearly meeting. I will be there.
That's your season, man. That's coming up. Yeah.
Well,
you're going to be a busy man.
It doesn't have anything to do with that.
Oh, okay. All right.
But we'll work around it.
Anything else that anyone would like to share? No? All right. Great. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn.
So moved, made, seconded, all in favor?
I think you all voted at the same time on that one.